In the late 9th century, the lands of Norway were a storm of blood and steel. A powerful chieftain, Harald Fairhair, was carving out a kingdom, forcing the free clans to bend the knee or face his wrath. Amidst this turmoil lived two young chieftains, sworn foster brothers named Ingolfr Arnarsson and Hærleifr Rómarsson. Their lives were bound by kinship and loyalty, but the growing conflict of the age would soon catch them in its web. During a winter festival, a careless insult from one of their rivals escalated into violence. Swords were drawn, blood was spilled, and the two brothers found themselves entangled in a deadly feud. Vengeance was a certainty, a cycle of killing that would claim many lives. Faced with this grim reality and the encroaching power of King Harald, Ingolfr and Hærleifr saw only one path forward: exile. They would not submit to a king, nor would they be consumed by an endless blood feud. They chose to leave the land of their ancestors behind and seek a new life across the unforgiving sea. Before setting his longship on its westward course, Ingolfr Arnarsson turned to the traditions of his people. He was a man who respected the old ways, believing that the fate of men was woven by the gods. Standing on the shore of Norway, he performed the ancient rites, seeking guidance for the perilous journey ahead. He declared that his new home would not be chosen by his own will, but by the will of the gods themselves. As a testament to this oath, he took the magnificent high seat pillars from his hall, great carved timbers that symbolized his authority and the heart of his home, and cast them into the vast, churning ocean. He vowed that wherever these sacred pillars washed ashore, he would build his new life. The sea, vast and impartial, was now the arbiter of his destiny. His fate was no longer in his hands, but adrift upon the waves, a solemn promise to the unseen forces that governed the world. After many weeks sailing west, a strange and dramatic coastline rose from the horizon. This was a land unlike any they had ever seen. Towering volcanic mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist, dominated the landscape. Plumes of steam rose from the earth, hinting at a fiery power hidden beneath the surface. They found fields of black, jagged rock left by ancient lava flows, stark and alien. Yet, nestled between these harsh features were deep, surprisingly green valleys, lush with life. This was a place of dramatic contrasts, a land of fire and ice. Most importantly, it was a land of freedom. There were no kings here to demand tribute, no jarls to enforce their will, no armies clashing over territory. It was an empty, wild, and unclaimed world. Awed by its raw and powerful beauty, Ingolfr gave it a name that captured its essence: Island, the land of Ice Iceland. The two foster brothers established their first winter settlement, but their approaches to this new world were starkly different. While Ingolfr waited patiently for a sign from the gods, Hærleifr grew restless. He dismissed the old rites as superstition and decided to forge his own path. On a subsequent voyage, he raided the coast of Ireland and returned not with free settlers, but with a group of enslaved Irish men and women whom the Norse called Westmen. Hærleifr was a harsh master, and his cruelty bred deep resentment among his captives. One day, he pushed them too far, commanding them to perform an impossible task. Seizing their opportunity, the slaves rose up in rebellion. They ambushed Hærleifr and his men, killing them all as they slept. When Ingolfr discovered his foster brother's slain body, he was overcome with grief and a solemn duty. He swore an oath of vengeance. He tracked the escaped slaves across the cold, rugged coastline to a small cluster of islands. There, on those windswept rocks, he cornered them and exacted his revenge, slaying them all. To this day, that chain of islands is known as Vestmannaeyjar, the Islands of the Westmen, a name forever marking the site of this grim and tragic chapter in Iceland's earliest history. With his duty to his slain brother fulfilled, Ingolfr returned to his primary quest, the search for his sacred high seat pillars. For 3 long and arduous winters, he and his followers methodically scoured the coastline of southern Iceland. The seasons were harsh, the landscape unforgiving. They moved from one temporary camp to another, enduring biting winds and heavy snows. Their survival depended entirely on the resilience of their kin, the health of their livestock, and their ability to hunt and fish in this wild new environment. It was a test of endurance, a long, patient wait for the gods to reveal their will. Ingolfr never wavered in his conviction. He trusted in his oath and knew the sea would eventually deliver on its promise. Finally, his scouts returned with incredible news. The pillars had been found. They had washed ashore in a wide, sheltered bay, nestled on a coastline where steam rose mysteriously from the ground, creating a perpetual haze of smoke. The long search was over. Following the guidance of his sacred pillars, Ingolfr made his way to the smoky bay. This, the gods had decided, would be his home. On the shore where the pillars had landed, he began the construction of his farm and longhouse, the first permanent Norse settlement in this vast, empty land. He named the place Reykjavik, which means Bay of Smoke, a name inspired by the geothermal steam that rose from the hot springs all around. His journey had become a saga, a tale of courage and faith that spread back to the old country. Inspired by his story and the promise of a land free from the tyranny of kings, more settlers began to follow in his wake. Ships arrived carrying families, livestock, and the hopes of a new beginning. From Ingolfr's single homestead, a new society began to grow. Clans spread out, claiming land and establishing their own farms throughout the island's fertile valleys. They were shaping a nation unlike any other, a community founded on freedom, where no king would ever rule. Instead, they would govern themselves through a great assembly of free people, the Althing. Ingolfr Arnarsson lived to a ripe old age, never again setting foot in Norway. The fires of his youth, the feuds and ambitions that had driven him from his homeland, had long since cooled. He watched his children and grandchildren grow up in a world he had helped to create. His days were spent not in battle or on long voyages, but in the quiet rhythms of a farmer's life. He saw sheep grazing peacefully on the green hills where once only the lonely cry of seabirds and the relentless sea wind had called him onward. His great adventure, which began with a violent feud and an escape into the unknown, had found its conclusion. His journey ended not in the glory of conquest or the accumulation of great wealth, but in something more profound, a sense of belonging. He had become part of a land that had no master, a place chosen not by a king's decree, but by fate itself. The sagas, the great oral histories of the Icelandic people, preserve his memory with a simple, powerful statement. Ingolfr was the most famous of all the first settlers, for he came to an uninhabited country and was the first to raise his hall in Iceland, and from him grew a nation. His name is not just that of a man. It is the first word in the long and remarkable story of Iceland. Ingolfr Arnarsson, as journey from exiled chieftain to founding father, established the legacy of a free and resilient island nation in the far north, a testament to the enduring human quest for freedom and a place to call home. In the age of long ships and iron, a woman was born to a house of kings. Her name was Odd Ketilsdottir, and her story would become a saga sung across the North Atlantic. She was the daughter of a powerful chieftain in Norway, her family bound by blood and oath to the sea kings who ruled the waves. They were wealthy, respected, and masters of their own destiny. But the winds of change were blowing across the Norwegian fjords. A new king, Harald Fairhair, was forging a single, unified kingdom with fire and steel. Old loyalties were broken, and old powers were cast down. Odd's family, proud and independent, stood against the tide and were swept away. Their world of honor and tradition fell from favor, and the shadows of a new order began to fall across their lands. The price of defiance was steep. Odd's father, a great chieftain, was killed in the conflict, his hall left empty and his legacy under threat. Seeking refuge in a new beginning, Aud and her family fled their ancestral home, crossing the sea to the rugged isles of the west. There, her son Thorstein the Red grew into a formidable warlord. He carved out a kingdom for himself in the wilds of Scotland, leading raids and commanding armies with the same fire that had burned in his grandfather's veins. For a time, it seemed as if their family's fortunes had been restored. But power built on violence is often fleeting. Thorstein was betrayed by his own allies, his ambitions cut short by a traitor's blade. Aud, who had already lost her father and her husband, was now a mother grieving for her only son. In a world ruled by men and their swords, she stood alone, a matriarch without a patriarch, a queen without a kingdom. Yet, Aud refused to be broken by grief or despair. With her male heirs gone and rival clans circling like wolves, Aud knew she had to forge her own path. Remaining in Scotland meant becoming a prize of war, a pawn in the games of petty chieftains. So she made a bold and secret plan. Deep within a forest, hidden from the eyes of her enemies, she commissioned the construction of a nair, a great ocean-going longship. It was a vessel of escape, a wooden key to a future she would command herself. As the ship neared completion, she made another decision, one that would redefine her leadership. She gathered all the thralls of her household, the enslaved people who had served her family for generations. Instead of keeping them in bondage, she granted them their freedom. In one act of profound empathy, she turned them from property into people, from slaves into loyal followers who would share in her gamble for a new life. When the ship was finally ready, they launched it under the cover of darkness. With Aud at the helm and her crew of freed men and women, they sailed west, turning their backs on the old world and heading into the vast, unknown ocean. The voyage was a trial of fire and water. They sailed into the teeth of North Atlantic gales, their small ship tossed by waves as tall as mountains. They navigated past hostile shores, where every strange sail was a potential threat. Through it all, Aud commanded the ship not with shouts or threats, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. She was the calm center of the storm, her mind clear and her decisions swift. Her crew, who had once been her slaves, now looked to her with a respect that went deeper than fear. They saw her wisdom, her foresight, her unshakable courage in the face of chaos. It was on this perilous journey across the sea road that she earned a new name, one that would follow her into legend. Aud the Deep-Minded. They were sailing toward a rumor, a whisper on the wind of a newly discovered land far to the west. It was a place called Iceland, a volcanic island where there were no kings, no earls, and no ancient feuds. It was a land where a person could claim their own ground and shape their own fate. After a long and arduous journey, the shores of Iceland rose from the horizon. It was a raw, primal landscape of ice and fire, a blank slate waiting to be written upon. While other settlers rushed to claim the most fertile lowlands, Aud steered her ship further, exploring the coastline with a patient eye. She chose her home in the west, in a region of wide, dramatic fjords that would come to be known as the Brea Fjorda. Here, she laid claim to a vast swath of land, enough to make her one of the most powerful chieftains in the new settlement. But Aud's rule was unlike any other. The sagas tell of chieftains who ruled with iron fists, hoarding land and power for themselves. Aud, however, governed with an open hand. She had promised her followers a share in their new future, and she kept her word. She divided the great territory she had claimed, granting large parcels of land to each of her followers, the same men and women who had sailed with her from Scotland. She built a great hall at her farm, Vammer, but it was not a fortress meant to intimidate. It was a center of community, where she held feasts not to display her wealth or power, but to build fellowship and strengthen the bonds of her new, diverse clan. Years passed, and Aud's settlement prospered. Her grandson, Olaf Fylen, came of age, and to celebrate his future, Aud decided to host his wedding feast. But this was to be no ordinary celebration. It became one of the grandest and most significant gatherings in the early history of Iceland. From all corners of the island they came. Powerful chieftains, newly arrived settlers, fierce warriors, and humble farmers. They gathered at her hall at Vamr, not as rivals, but as guests united in peace under Odd's roof. This feast was the culmination of her life's work. She had not conquered a kingdom, but she had built a society. At the head of the great hall, she sat in the high seat, a position usually reserved for the most powerful male chieftain. She was an old woman now, her face a map of the long roads she had traveled. Yet she sat with a calm and wise authority, a matriarch who had faced down kings and storms, who had outlived her grief, and who had woven a new world from the threads of a broken one. As she felt her long life drawing to a close, Odd the Deep-Minded prepared for her final journey. She walked the lands she had claimed, visiting each farm she had established and each family she had settled. She looked upon the fields, the houses, and the people, and saw the fruits of her vision. She had not just claimed a piece of Iceland. She had planted a community that would grow for centuries. With the same foresight she had shown throughout her life, she chose her own burial place. She instructed her people to build her grave on a tidal beach below the high water mark, so that she would rest in the embrace of the sea that had been both her adversary and her path to freedom. The sagas say she was buried in her ship, a queen laid to rest in her vessel, forever facing the sea road that had brought her to this land of new beginnings. When she died, it was said that there was no woman held in higher esteem in all the western lands. She passed not into silence, but into legend. Odd's legacy was not written in stone monuments or grand conquests. It lived on in the people she had led and the society she had helped to shape. Her descendants became some of the most influential figures in Icelandic history, chieftains and law speakers, poets and priests, their names echoing through the sagas. They were the children of a woman who had shown that true strength was not found in cruelty or dominance, but in wisdom, courage, and generosity. Iceland, the land without kings, would forever remember the queen who had sailed out of the darkness and built a new world not through force, but through the profound power of a deep and unshakable mind. The late 800s were a time of fire and steel in the north. The lands that would become Norway and Denmark were torn apart by brutal clan wars. Kings rose and fell, and a man's survival often depended on the strength of his sword arm and the loyalty of his followers. In this violent world, a warrior named Rollo carved out a fearsome reputation. He was a sea king, a man of immense strength and ambition, whose name was spoken with both respect and fear. But his fierce independence put him on a collision course with a rising king who demanded absolute loyalty. Rollo defied the king's decree against raiding Norwegian shores, and for his defiance, he was declared an outlaw, banished from his homeland forever. But exile was not the end for Rollo. It was a new beginning. He was a natural leader, and his reputation drew others to his cause. Ship captains with a thirst for adventure, fearsome berserkers who lived for battle, and countless outcasts with nowhere else to go flocked to his banner. They were not just warriors. They were families' men, women, and children who had lost their homes and now sought a new life, a new land to call their own. Rollo gathered this disparate group, forging them into a loyal and formidable force. Their longships, with their dragon-headed prows, set sail from the fjords of Norway, leaving behind a past of feuds and betrayal, heading south toward the rich and tempting lands of Francia. Rollo's fleet descended upon the coasts of Francia like a storm from the north. They sailed up the Seine and other rivers, their raids striking deep into the heart of the kingdom. The Franks, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the Vikings, were powerless to stop them. Monasteries, rich with gold and silver, were sacked and burned to the ground. Towns were plundered, and the wealth of Francia began to flow back to Rollo's growing army. His name became a whisper of terror. a thunderous roar that echoed across the Frankish countryside. He was the wolf at the door, the unstoppable force of destruction. Yet, even as his coffers filled with silver and his legend grew, Rollo was a man of foresight. He was more than just a raider. He was a strategist who understood the limitations of his way of life. He knew that a life of constant raiding was unsustainable. They could plunder and burn, but they could not live on ships forever. His people needed more than just treasure. They needed land. They needed a permanent home where they could farm, raise their families, and build a future. The constant search for loot would eventually lead to their downfall. Rollo began to look at the fertile fields and fortified towns of Francia, not just as targets for plunder, but as the key to his people's long-term survival. In the year 885, Rollo's ambitions led him to join a massive Viking army that laid siege to the city of Paris. It was one of the largest Viking forces ever assembled, and their target was the strategic and symbolic heart of West Francia. Hundreds of longships blockaded the Seine, and a vast army of Northmen surrounded the city's formidable stone walls. For 10 long and brutal months, the Vikings assaulted the city, but Paris, under the determined leadership of Count Odo, refused to fall. The siege was a grueling stalemate, a clash of Viking ferocity against Frankish resilience. For Rollo, the long siege was a profound lesson. As he watched the defenders of Paris hold firm behind their stone walls, he saw the true nature of power. It wasn't just about the ability to raid and destroy. It was about the ability to endure and protect. He observed the fertile farmland surrounding the city, land that could feed a population and sustain a kingdom through even the longest siege. Plunder was temporary, a fleeting prize that could be spent or lost. But land, and the strong walls to defend it was the foundation of lasting survival and true power. The siege of Paris transformed Rollo's perspective. His goals shifted from a life of raiding to the dream of ruling a land of his own. The endless Viking raids had brought the kingdom of Francia to its knees. King Charles, known to history as the Simple, was a ruler in a desperate situation. His armies could not defeat the Northmen in the field, and his treasury was drained from paying them off. He needed a permanent solution to stop the constant cycle of violence and extortion. In a bold and pragmatic move, Charles decided to make his greatest enemy his greatest ally. He sent envoys to Rollo, the most powerful Viking leader on the Seine, with an unprecedented offer, a bargain that would change the course of history. The king's proposal was extraordinary. He offered Rollo a vast territory of land along the lower Seine River, the very region the Vikings had so often terrorized. He would also grant Rollo a noble title, making him a duke of the Frankish realm. To seal the pact, Charles offered the hand of his own daughter, Gisela, in marriage. This would bind Rollo to the royal family and integrate him into the Frankish nobility. In return for this incredible grant of land, title, and marriage, Rollo had one crucial duty. He and his men must defend Francia from all other Viking raiders. Rollo, the pragmatist, saw the immense opportunity and accepted the terms. However, when the time came to swear fealty, a dispute arose over the ceremony. Rollo was expected to kneel and kiss the king's foot, an act of submission he found intolerable. Refusing to bow, he instead ordered one of his warriors to perform the rite for him. The warrior, showing the same defiant spirit as his leader, simply grabbed the king's foot and lifted it to his mouth, causing the king to tumble backward. The Northmen roared with laughter, a clear sign that while they were becoming allies, they would not be easily tamed. The land granted to Rollo and his followers soon became known as Normandy Terra Norinorum, the land of the Northmen. Rollo proved to be as skilled a ruler as he was a warrior. He immediately set about transforming his new domain from a Viking stronghold into an organized duchy. He distributed the fertile farmland among his most trusted followers, turning raiders into landed lords. He strengthened the fortresses and rebuilt the towns that his own men had once plundered, establishing a strong defensive network to protect his territory. Crucially, Rollo understood that a society could not be built on violence alone. He established a new and rigorous legal system, known as the Norman Law. It was famous for its harsh but effective justice. One of his most famous decrees was a strict prohibition against theft. No man shall steal another's grain. Legends say that to prove the effectiveness of his laws, he left a valuable bracelet hanging from a tree in a public forest, and for years, no one dared to touch it. He brought order to a land that had known only chaos, laying the groundwork for a stable and prosperous society. The Vikings began to change, their Norse blood and traditions slowly blending with the culture and language of the local Franks. They were no longer just sea raiders. They were becoming farmers, lords, and knights. As part of the treaty with King Charles, Rollo had agreed to convert to Christianity. He was baptized in the Cathedral of Rouen, taking the Christian name Robert. This was a critical political act, signaling his commitment to his new role as a Frankish duke and integrating his people into the religious fabric of Europe. However, Rollo's conversion may have been more pragmatic than pious. It was said that while he publicly embraced the new faith, he continued to honor the old gods of his youth in private. Rumors persisted that even on his deathbed, he made sacrifices to both Odin and the Christian god, hedging his bets for the afterlife. This dual identity was reflected throughout Normandy. As his people settled the land, they built Christian churches, their spires reaching for the sky. But beside them, they often constructed longhouses in the traditional Norse style. A new and unique culture began to form, one that was neither purely Viking nor purely Frankish. They spoke a new language, a dialect of French infused with Old Norse words. They adopted Frankish methods of warfare, particularly the use of heavy cavalry, but fought with the same ferocity that had carried their ancestors across the sea. They were becoming something new, a hybrid people forged in the crucible of conquest and assimilation. They were the Normans. Rollo's legacy was one of iron and law, a foundation upon which his descendants built an empire. The small duchy he had carved out of Francia grew into one of the most powerful and dynamic political entities in Europe. His successors were ambitious and ruthless, expanding their influence through strategic marriages and relentless warfare. They married into the royal families of France and other kingdoms, weaving Norman blood into the tapestry of European nobility. They perfected the art of mounted combat, creating armies of heavily armored knights that became the most feared military force of their age. The seed of ambition that Rollo had planted in Normandy would one day bear astonishing fruit. Generations later, one of his direct descendants, a man named William, would look across the English Channel with the same hunger for land and power that had once driven Rollo. Distant grandson would gather a massive army, cross the sea, and win a kingdom with a single decisive battle. He would become known to history as William the Conqueror, and his conquest of England in 1066 would forever change the destiny of that nation, embedding the Norman legacy deep into its language, culture, and law. In his old age, Rollo the Walker, the man who had marched across kingdoms, could finally rest. He walked the green fields of Normandy, the same lands he had once taken by the sword, now peaceful and prosperous under his rule. He had transformed a band of exiled raiders into the masters of a powerful duchy. He was a bridge between two worlds, the pagan North and Christian Europe, the age of Vikings and the age of knights. Before his death, it is said that he made one final grand offering, perfectly embodying his life's duality. He ordered 100 pounds of gold to be given to the Christian churches of his domain, but he also had 100 captured enemies sacrificed to the Old Norse gods of his youth. The saga of Rollo the Walker thus came to an end. He died not just as the last of the great Viking warlords, but as the first Duke of Normandy, a founder of a dynasty whose influence would echo for centuries. From the cold shores of Scandinavia, a new story begins, not in the storm-tossed waves of the Atlantic, but in the mists of the East. Around the year 860 CE, longships, their dragon prows cutting through the fog, leave the familiar coastlines of Sweden behind. They do not sail west to raid England or France, but east, navigating the labyrinthine rivers that weave across the vast, unknown lands of Eastern Europe. These are the Russ, a name meaning the men who row, and their journey is not just for plunder, but for profit. They follow the great river arteries, the Volga, the Dnieper, on a quest for silver. In these lands, they trade valuable furs, honey, and amber for gleaming silver dirhams from the Abbasid Caliphate in the east. The rivers become conduits of wealth, a river of silver, connecting the Baltic to the Caspian. But where silver flows, swords are soon drawn. The promise of fortune attracts warriors, and these river routes quickly transform from peaceful trade highways into contested battlegrounds, where ambition and steel decide who controls the flow of riches. Among these ambitious Norsemen is a chieftain named Rurik, a figure shrouded in the mists of legend, yet credited as the founder of a dynasty. Said to be of the Yngling clan, a lineage of legendary Swedish kings, Rurik's destiny lies not in his homeland, but in the fractious lands of the Slavs. The local Slavic and Finnic tribes, weary of constant internal feuds and external threats, see in the organized and formidable Russ a potential solution to their chaos. According to the primary chronicle, a medieval history of the region, the tribes send a message to the Russ, declaring, "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us." Whether by invitation or by conquest, Rurik accepts the call. He settles in the north, establishing a stronghold at Novgorod. Here, in this land of rivers and forests, he founds a dynasty that will endure for over 700 years. This moment marks the genesis of the first East Slavic state, a realm that history will come to know as the Kiev on Rus. While Rurik solidifies his rule in the north, two of his kinsmen, Eskold and Dir, look south with restless ambition. They lead their own band of warriors down the Dnieper River, a vital artery that flows towards the riches of the Byzantine Empire. Their journey brings them to a small, well-positioned settlement on a hill overlooking the river, Kiev. Recognizing its strategic importance as a trading hub, controlling the route to the Black Sea, they seize it for themselves. From this new power base, Paskold and Dir establish their own dominion, independent of Rurik's authority in Novgorod. This act plants the first seeds of rivalry within the burgeoning Rus world. The realm is now split between two centers of power, the northern stronghold of Novgorod and the southern gateway of Kiev. The unity of the Rus is yet to be forged, and the growing tension between these two poles of influence sets the stage for a future struggle for supremacy. The southern city of Kiev becomes a launching point for daring raids against the wealthiest prize of the known world, Constantinople, or as the Norse called it, Miklagard, the great city. Lured by tales of its immense wealth, the Rus assemble fleets of longships and sweep down the Dnieper and across the Black Sea. Their attacks on the Byzantine coasts are bold and terrifying, but they meet their match in the empire's formidable defenses. The legendary walls of Constantinople, which had stood for centuries against countless foes, prove impenetrable. The Byzantine navy unleashes its most fearsome weapon, Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary substance that burns even on water, incinerating the wooden ships of the Rus fleets. Though their assaults are repelled, the Rus do not return empty-handed. The Byzantines, impressed and wary of their ferocity, often buy peace with gold and lucrative trade treaties. Over time, the relationship evolves from one of raiding to one of service. The Rus warriors, renowned for their loyalty and combat prowess, become sought-after mercenaries in the Byzantine army, forming the elite Varangian Guard, the personal bodyguards of the emperor himself. After Rurik's death, the mantle of leadership passes not to his young son, Igor, but to a kinsman named Oleg. Acting as regent, Oleg proves to be a leader of immense vision and ruthless ambition. Known as Oleg the Seer for his reputed prophetic abilities, he understands that the future of the Rus lies in unifying the northern and southern domains. Marching his forces south from Novgorod, he arrives at the hills of Kiev. In a cunning move, he lures Askold and Deer out to meet him, then declares that they are not of royal blood and presents the young Igor as Rurik's true heir. He has the two chieftains killed and captures the city, proclaiming Kiev the mother of all Rus cities. With this decisive act, Oleg unites the northern and southern trade routes under a single rule, forging the Kievan Rus into a coherent and powerful state. His reign is one of consolidation and expansion, but his end is the stuff of legend. A prophecy foretold he would die because of his horse. Disturbed, Oleg sent the beloved steed away. Years later, upon hearing of the horse's death, he went to see its remains and, mocking the prophecy, placed his foot on its skull. A venomous serpent, hidden within, struck him, and the prophecy was fulfilled. Decades later, the Rus face another crisis of leadership when Oleg's successor, Igor of Kiev, is killed. While collecting tribute from the Drevlian tribe, his excessive demands provoke a rebellion, and he is brutally murdered. His wife, Olga, is left as regent for their young son, Sviatoslav. The Drevlians, assuming a woman would be a weak ruler, send matchmakers to propose she marry their prince. Olga's response is a masterclass in vengeance. She has the first delegation of envoys buried alive. A second group she tricks into a bathhouse and has it burned to the ground. Her revenge culminates in a brutal siege of the Drevlian capital. According to the chronicle, she offers them a seemingly merciful peace, asking only for a small tribute from each household, 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. When the birds are delivered, she has her soldiers tie smoldering pieces of cloth to their legs and release them. The birds fly back to their nests in the wooden city, setting it ablaze from within. Olga's cunning retribution secured her son's throne and earned her a fearsome reputation. Yet her legacy is also one of transformation. Late in life, she travels to Constantinople and converts to Orthodox Christianity, becoming the first Rus ruler to embrace the faith that would one day define her people. Under Olga's descendants, the Rus complete their transformation from Scandinavian raiders to rulers of a vast and complex kingdom. Their grandson, Vladimir the Great, would make Orthodox Christianity the state religion, forever linking the Rus to the Byzantine cultural sphere. Cities like Kiev and Novgorod grow into magnificent urban centers, filled with stone churches, bustling markets, and fortified walls. They establish a formal legal code, the Ruskaya Pravda, blending Slavic custom with Byzantine law. The great rivers that once served as pathways for raids now function as the economic backbone of a thriving state, connecting the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea and the Byzantine Empire in the south and the Caspian Sea in the east. The identity of the Rus itself evolves. While their ruling dynasty retains its Norse bloodline for generations, they adopt the language, customs, and eventually the faith of their Slavic subjects. The Viking adventurers who came for silver have become the sovereigns of a new Eastern European civilization. The saga of the Eastern Vikings draws to a close not with the clang of swords, but with the murmur of commerce and the fusion of cultures. In the grand markets of Kiev, traders from across the known world, Greeks from Constantinople, Arabs from Baghdad, Germans from the Hanseatic League, and Scandinavians from the north gather to exchange their goods. They speak a multitude of tongues, haggling over furs, wax, slaves, and silk. Yet beneath the clamor of this cosmopolitan hub lies a fundamental truth, an origin story whispered in the shared history of the city itself. It was the fierce ambition and tireless determination of the Northmen that laid the foundation for this great kingdom. The oars of the north had carved the heart of the east. In the 9th century, the coasts of Ireland were a place of prayer and plunder. Viking longships, like wolves of the sea, descended upon the island's rich monasteries, their dragon-headed prows striking fear into the hearts of monks. Gold, silver, and sacred texts were taken back across the waves, But one raider saw more than just treasure on these green shores. His name was Olaf the White, a Norwegian warlord whose ambition was as vast as the ocean he sailed. He wasn't content with just raiding. He wanted to build, to rule. Around the year 840 CE, as his ship navigated the mouth of a winding river, he found the perfect location. The river Liffey offered a deep, sheltered harbor, ideal for defense and perfect for trade. Standing on the deck of his longship, looking at the dark waters and the rolling green hills, he made a declaration. Here, on this spot, a city of the north would rise. The Vikings, men more accustomed to the axe than the spade, began to build. On a ridge overlooking a dark tidal pool, they erected a long fort, a ship fortress made of earth and timber. The local Gaels called the area Duv Linn, meaning Black Pool, a name the Norsemen adapted into their own tongue. Dyflin, what started as a temporary camp for wintering raiders, soon transformed into something more permanent. It became a bustling, thriving town, the first of its kind in Ireland. Ships from across the known world docked at its port, their hulls heavy with silver from the Abbasid Caliphate, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory from Greenland, and furs from the northern forests. But the most valuable and tragic cargo was human, slaves captured in raids across Ireland and Britain. Dyflin became one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. The local Celtic chieftains, wary but pragmatic, watched this foreign power grow on their land. They forged uneasy alliances with the Norse, trading goods and gold, but the peace was fragile. Trust was a currency scarcer than silver, and beneath the surface of commerce, a deep-seated rivalry simmered. To secure his burgeoning kingdom, Olaf the White knew he needed more than just a strong fortress. He needed powerful alliances. His gaze fell upon Audr the Deep-Minded, a woman of formidable lineage and intellect. She was the daughter of a powerful Norwegian jarl, and crucially, the widow of a Norse chieftain who had previously tried to rule in Dublin. By marrying Audr, Olaf not only gained a respected partner, but also solidified his claim over the region, uniting rival Norse factions under his banner. This strategic union, however, was a double-edged sword. It cemented Olaf's control and brought a semblance of stability, but it also stirred resentment. The native Irish Gaels saw it as a further entrenchment of foreign invaders, while rival Norse jarls, who coveted Dublin for themselves, viewed Olaf's growing power with envy and suspicion. The fragile peace that had been bought with gold and marriage vows began to fray. A quiet but intense rivalry developed, a dangerous undercurrent of ambition and betrayal flowing just beneath the surface of daily life in Dyflin. Under Olaf and his successors, Dublin transformed into the undisputed heart of Norse Ireland. It was the capital of a unique maritime kingdom, a domain that stretched across the Irish Sea. Its rulers were not kings of land in the traditional sense. They were sea kings, their power rooted in their fleets of longships and their control over the vital trade routes. Their influence radiated outwards from the Black Pool on the Liffey, connecting Dublin to other Viking strongholds like York in England, the Orkney and Hebridean Islands off Scotland, and even Iceland. Through an intricate network of long-distance exchange, goods from Dublin traveled as far as the markets of Baghdad and the shores of the Caspian Sea. This wealth, however, was built on a foundation of violence. While merchants traded silk and spices in the city's bustling marketplace, Viking raiding parties continued to sail out from Dublin's harbor, sacking Irish monasteries and holy sites. This relentless plunder fed the city's coffers, but also fueled a growing fire of resentment and a holy wrath among the Gaelic Irish, who saw the Sea Kings as godless heathens. The constant raids and the growing arrogance of the Norsemen in Dublin could not be ignored forever. The High King of Ireland, Mael Secnil Mac Mael Ruinade, a powerful ruler from the southern Hugh Neil dynasty, decided that the foreign stronghold had to be destroyed. He began to gather a great army, uniting disparate Gaelic clans, vengeful monks whose monasteries had been burned, and even rival Norse factions who saw an opportunity to weaken Dublin's dominance. In 866, this formidable coalition marched on the Norse kingdom. Olaf the White, a seasoned warrior, was not one to hide behind his city's walls. He led his army out to meet the challenge, forming his elite warriors into a dense shield wall at a place steeped in Irish mythology, the Hill of Tara. The battle was a chaotic and brutal clash of cultures in steel. The disciplined Viking shield wall held firm against the ferocious charges of the Gaels, but they were vastly outnumbered. The fighting was fierce, a storm of axes, swords, and spears, but defeat for the Norse was inevitable. Olaf's army was broken, and he and the survivors fled the field. Mael Secnel's army marched on Dublin, burning the settlement to the ground and driving its Norse inhabitants out, forcing them to scatter to the Isles and their homelands across the sea. For several years, the fortress on the Liffey lay in ruins, reclaimed by the Gaels. The great Norse experiment in Ireland seemed to be over, but the dream of Dublin was not so easily extinguished. From his new base in Scotland, Olaf's son, Thorstein the Red, plotted his return. He inherited his father's ambition and cunning, and he was determined to reclaim his birthright. Thorstein didn't rely on brute force alone. He spent years forging new, clever alliances with Scottish chieftains and other Viking lords, gathering strength for his campaign. When the time was right, he led his fleet back across the Irish Sea. The Gaels had rebuilt their own fort at the site, known as Athcliath, the Ford of Hurdles. Thorstein's reclamation of the city was not a grand, pitched battle, but a brutal and effective night assault. Under the cover of darkness, his warriors stormed the fort, overwhelming its defenders and retaking the strategic position. The Norse were back. The city of Dyflin rose once more from the ashes, but it was different this time. The years of conflict, trade, and proximity had begun to blur the lines between the two cultures. The new Dublin was a fusion, a place where Norse and Irish blood, language, and law began to mix, creating a unique Hiberno-Norse identity. Over the next century and a half, the Sea Kings of Dublin and their people continued to evolve. The descendants of Olaf the White and the first Viking raiders gradually became more Irish than Scandinavian. The hard-edged Norse culture began to soften, absorbing the customs, language, and beliefs of the land they had conquered. The rulers of Dublin, once devout followers of Odin and Thor, began to convert to Christianity, building churches where temples to their old gods might have once stood. They intermarried extensively with the Gaelic nobility, their children bearing names that blended Norse and Irish traditions. The kingdom they ruled was no longer a simple foreign outpost, but a complex, hybrid state, a powerful player in the intricate politics of medieval Ireland. This long era of Norse dominance reached its climax and its end early 11th century. The Irish High King, Brian Boru, challenged the power of Dublin and its allies, leading to the legendary Battle of Clontarf in 1014. The last great Norse Sea King of Dublin was defeated, and though the city itself remained, the battle effectively broke the back of Viking political power in Ireland forever, marking the twilight of the Sea Kings. The saga of the Dublin Sea Kings was over, but their legacy was etched into the very stones of the city they had founded. The Norse name, Dyflin, from the black pool where their first ships anchored, survived and evolved into the modern name Dublin. Their influence can still be seen in the layout of the old city, in archaeological finds of swords and silver, and in the DNA of its people. The city's story is a testament to the transformative power of time and culture. They came to Ireland as raiders, seeking plunder and glory. They stayed to build, to trade, and to rule. Their longships brought fear and destruction, but they also brought commerce, connection, and a city that endures to this day. In the cold lands of Norway, where feuds were as common as the winter snow, a young warrior named Ragnvald of Trondheim grew tired of the endless cycle of violence. He gathered a band of young, ambitious warriors, all of them weary of fighting over barren lands and old grudges. They sought something more than just survival. They yearned for fortune, for fame, and for a purpose that stretched beyond the fjords of their homeland. It was then that whispers from the east began to reach their shores, carried by traders and travelers. These were tales of a magnificent city called Miklagard, the great city known to others as Constantinople. They spoke of a powerful emperor who sat on a golden throne, an emperor who paid handsomely in gold for the loyalty and fighting prowess of men from the north. The allure of such a prize was too strong to resist. The promise of wealth and glory, earned through strength and skill, was a dream that every Norseman cherished. Ragnvald and his followers assembled at the water's edge, their longships bobbing in the frigid waves. There, with the salt spray on their faces and the cold wind in their hair, they swore a binding oath. It was a solemn vow, one that tied their fates together. They swore to serve the foreign emperor with unwavering honor, to fight his battles as if they were their own, and to one day return to their homeland not as they had left, but as men of renown, their chests heavy with silver, and their names etched into the sagas. This oath was their pact, their guiding star, the invisible chain that would hold them together through the perils that lay ahead. The journey to Miklagard was a saga in itself, a perilous voyage that would test their resolve at every turn. Their longships sliced through the dark waters of the Baltic, leaving the familiar shores of Scandinavia behind. They entered the vast, winding river systems of Eastern Europe, a network of waterways that served as the highways of the Rus. This was a land of dense forests, sprawling marshes, and scattered Slavic settlements. For Ragnvald and his men, it was a world of both opportunity and danger. They traded their northern furs and armor for grain and supplies, their gleaming axes a silent deterrent to any who might think them easy prey. At other times, they were forced to raid, taking what they needed by force when peaceful negotiation failed. Their long journey eventually led them to the bustling river port of Kiev, a rising power in the land of the Rus. The city was ruled by the formidable Prince Yaroslav the Wise, a ruler who understood the value of a strong alliance and the ferocity of the Norsemen. Impressed by their discipline and martial bearing, Yaroslav granted them safe conduct through his lands, allowing them to continue their journey south towards the Black Sea and the Byzantine Empire. The path was not without its hardships. Disease crept into their ranks, claiming strong warriors in their sleep. Ambushes sprung from the dense forests lining the riverbanks, forcing them to fight for their lives. Yet, with every challenge they overcame, their reputation grew. Stories of the disciplined, ferocious warriors from the north traveled ahead of them, a ripple of fear and respect that preceded their arrival in the great city of their dreams. After months of travel, the sight that greeted them was beyond anything they could have ever imagined. Miklagard, Constantinople, rose from the shores of the Bosphorus like a jeweled crown. It was a city that defied belief, a labyrinth of marble palaces that seemed to touch the sky, their walls adorned with shimmering mosaics that depicted saints and emperors in gold and precious stones. The streets teemed with a vibrant, chaotic mix of people from every known corner of the world, merchants from Persia, scholars from Greece, and nomads from the steppes, all mingling in a symphony of languages and cultures. The sheer scale and opulence of the city overwhelmed the Norsemen, who had grown up in wooden longhouses amidst the stark beauty of their homeland. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. The emperor, Basil II, a shrewd and battle-hardened ruler, had long relied on Varangians to serve as his personal bodyguard. He trusted their loyalty far more than the scheming nobles of his own court. Basil himself came to inspect the new arrivals. He walked among the towering Norsemen, his gaze sharp and appraising. He saw not just their imposing height and broad shoulders, but the unwavering steel in their eyes. As Ragnvald and his men stood in formation, the eastern sun glinted off the polished steel of their most prized weapons, the massive, long-handled battle axes that were the hallmark of the northern warrior. In that moment, in the heart of the Byzantine Empire, they earned a new name, a title that would become legendary: the Axe-Bearers of the North. Ragnvald and his men were quickly plunged into the endless wars of the Byzantine Empire. Their new master, Emperor Basil II, was a relentless campaigner, determined to expand and secure his borders. The Varangians were his elite shock troops, sent to the most dangerous frontiers where the fighting was fiercest. They marched under the scorching sun of Anatolia, battling rebellious lords who sought to carve out their own kingdoms. They campaigned in the dusty landscapes of Syria, clashing with Saracen raiders who threatened the empire's southern provinces. Their unique style of fighting, a blend of disciplined shield wall tactics and terrifying berserker fury, left a deep impression on all who witnessed it. Their courage in the heat of battle became the stuff of legend. Byzantine chroniclers, accustomed to the more structured warfare of their own armies, wrote in awe of the newcomers. They described them not as men, but as something more primal, more fearsome. They were the barbarians who fight like wolves, a force of nature that swept away all who stood before them. Yet for all their ferocity and independence, they were bound by the sacred oath they had sworn back in Norway. This oath demanded absolute obedience to the emperor. It was an unbreakable bond that forbade them from questioning orders or pursuing their own ambitions. As the years stretched on, the emperor's wars seemed to have no end, and the promise of a glorious return home began to feel more and more distant, a fading dream in a life of constant battle. The years bled into one another, marked by the changing seasons of campaign and garrison duty. Ragnvald, once a young warrior with dreams of quick fortune, was now a seasoned commander, his hair streaked with gray and his coffers filled with Byzantine gold. He had grown rich, but he had also grown weary. The constant warfare had taken its toll, and the longing for the green hills of Norway gnawed at his heart. This weariness was shared by many of his comrades. Some, less patient than Ragnvald, began to whisper of mutiny. They spoke of seizing their accumulated wealth and sailing home, not as loyal servants, but as conquering kings, rich enough to claim their own lands. Their whispers grew into a conspiracy, a dangerous plot that threatened to shatter the very foundation of their service. The conspiracy did not escape the notice of the emperor's ever-watchful agents. The emperor's chief steward, a man skilled in the art of intrigue, approached Ragnvald in secret. He knew of the plot and offered Ragnvald a choice, a temptation wrapped in gold. He would be rewarded handsomely if he betrayed the conspirators, his own countrymen, his brothers in arms. Ragnvald was torn. On one side was the bond of friendship, the loyalty he felt to the men who had sailed and fought alongside him for decades. On the other was the sacred, binding oath he had sworn to the emperor, an oath of absolute loyalty. In the end, the weight of the oath proved heavier than the bonds of brotherhood. He chose his sworn duty over his personal feelings. With a heavy heart, Ragnvald revealed the plot. He then stood in the palace courtyard, a silent, grim witness, as his former comrades were led out and executed for their treason. Decades after he first swore his oath on the shores of Norway, an aged Ragnvald finally sailed for home. His longship was heavy, not with the plunder of a mutineer, but with the gold he had honorably earned through a lifetime of service. He carried with him an imperial seal, a testament to his long and loyal duty to the Byzantine emperor. As his ship cut through the familiar, cold waters of the North Sea, he prepared to return as the man of fame and fortune he had once dreamed of becoming. But the Norway he returned to was not the Norway he had left behind. The land had changed profoundly. The old gods, Odin and Thor, were largely forgotten, their altars replaced by the stone churches of the new Christian faith that now ruled the land. The feuding warlords of his youth were gone, replaced by a more centralized kingdom. His own name, Ragnvald of Trondheim, which he had hoped would be sung in Sagas, was barely a whisper, a forgotten echo from a bygone era. The world had moved on without him, He was a stranger in his own homeland, a relic of a past that no longer existed. He walked to the burial cairn of his father, a simple mound of stones overlooking the fjord. There, with no one to witness his final act of service, he dug into the cold earth and buried his great Varangian axe, a symbol of his life as a warrior in a foreign land. As he covered it with soil, he murmured to the wind, his voice raspy with age and regret. Gold is light. Oaths are heavy. The legacy of the Varangian Guard, however, endured long after Ragnvald and his generation had passed into memory. Their presence was etched not just into the sagas of the North, but into the very stone of the empire they had served. For centuries to come, travelers visiting the magnificent Hagia Sophia in Constantinople could find faint inscriptions carved into the marble railings. They were Norse runes, a message from a distant past, left by a warrior far from home. Halfdan carved these runes. These simple words were a testament to the thousands of Northmen who had stood guard in the heart of the Christian world, their loyalty and strength becoming an integral part of Byzantine history. Their service became a legend that spanned two cultures. In the north, they were the heroes who journeyed to Miklagard and returned with unimaginable wealth. In the south, they were the axe-wielding barbarians, the emperor's most trusted and fearsome protectors. They were warriors from what the Byzantines considered the very edge of the world, guarding the greatest and most sophisticated empire of their age. The saga of the Varangian Guard serves as a powerful reminder of a unique chapter in history, a time when two vastly different worlds collided. It is a story that concludes with a profound truth. The cold, harsh north gave the world not only its fiercest swords and most formidable warriors, but also its truest and most unbreakable oaths. The year is 1408, and the world is growing colder. On the jagged coast of Greenland, the western settlement has fallen silent. For years, the ships from Iceland and Norway have stopped coming, their routes choked by a relentless expansion of sea ice. The connection to the old world, the lifeblood of the Norse colony, has been severed. In the eastern settlement, a farmer named Arn Thorvaldsen, a man who carries the blood of Leif Erikson in his veins, stares out at the frozen fjord. While others speak of abandoning this land, Arn refuses. This is his home, the land of his ancestors, and he will not be the one to let its memory fade. There was a time when this harsh landscape knew prosperity. Greenland's fjords once echoed with the lowing of cattle and the clang of the blacksmith S-hammer. Trade ships brought the riches of Europe iron for tools and weapons, fine cloth, and the word of God. In return, the Greenlanders sent back walrus ivory, thick wool, and the prized white falcons sought by kings. It was a thriving outpost of Christendom at the edge of the known world. Now those days are a fading memory. The grand churches, built with hope in stone, stand empty, their bells silent. The once green pastures are buried under snow for most of the year, and the cattle have long since perished. Seals, hunted from kayaks in the frigid waters, are the only reliable source of food to see them through the ever-lengthening winters. Amidst the growing despair, the community is divided. Father Eric, the settlement's priest, preaches unwavering faith, insisting that God is merely testing them and that they must remain true. But in the dim light of the long houses, others whisper of older things. They say the Christian God has forsaken them, and that the old gods of the north, the gods of ice and wind, have returned to reclaim their domain. The winter that followed was one of devastating famine. The autumn hunting season failed, with seal and caribou mysteriously absent. The stored food dwindled with terrifying speed, and the cold settled into their bones, a permanent, gnawing ache. Sickness followed hunger, and Arn's wife, Sigrid, fell gravely ill, her breath growing shallow in the frigid air of their home. A chilling paranoia crept through the settlement. Rumors spread in hushed, fearful tones of families who had simply vanished during the blizzards, their homes found empty, their footprints erased by the snow. It was as if the ice itself was swallowing them whole. One night, As Arn stood vigil by Sigurd's side, a strange light appeared on the western horizon. It was not the familiar, ethereal dance of the aurora. This was a steady, fiery glow over the sea, a beacon in the crushing darkness. For Arn, it was not a portent of doom, but a sign, a call to action. With renewed purpose, Arn gathered the last able-bodied men. He rallied them around the Sea Dragon Asterisk, the last seaworthy longship in the settlement, its timbers groaning but still strong. Their mission was desperate and perhaps foolish: to sail west, to break through the ice and discover the fate of the vanished western settlement. In the back of Arn's mind, a wilder hope flickered, the hope of rediscovering Vinland, the legendary green shore his ancestor had found centuries before. The voyage was a descent into a world of myth and madness. Storms battered their small vessel, and the ever-shifting sea ice threatened to crush their hull. In the disorienting fog, the crew was haunted by the sounds of the deep, the mournful, booming songs of whales echoing from directly beneath them, a sound so profound it felt like the voice of a sleeping giant. The journey was no longer a search for men, but a passage into the unknown. After weeks of struggle, they finally reached the shores of the western settlement. The silence that greeted them was absolute and terrifying. They walked through a ghost town of empty longhouses and collapsed sod roofs. The bones of livestock and humans lay scattered in the frozen soil, a testament to a slow, agonizing end. Crosses, symbols of their faith, were half buried in the snow, leaning as if in surrender. On a piece of driftwood near the abandoned pier, Arn found a journal, its words crudely carved into the wood. It told a grim tale of starvation and disease, of prayers that went unanswered. The final entries spoke of the sea rising higher each year, a strange and ominous complaint. A new horror began as they explored the ruins. One by one, members of Arn's crew began to disappear. They would wander off, drawn by what they claimed was ghostly singing on the wind, a beautiful, alluring melody that no one else could hear. They never returned. Arn pressed on, his crew dwindling, his heart heavy with dread. He eventually found the ruins of the settlement's main chapel. Inside, the Christian symbols were still visible, but they were intertwined with something else. On the stone walls, Norse runes were carved alongside strange, swirling symbols he did not recognize, the art of the native peoples of this land. A profound realization washed over him. His people had not just died. Faced with annihilation, they had made a choice. They had not been conquered by the land. They had joined it, blending their culture, their beliefs, and perhaps their blood with the Skrellings, the people who knew how to survive in this frozen world. They had shed their Norse identity to become something new. When Father Eric arrived and saw the pagan carvings, he recoiled in horror, demanding they burn the blasphemous place to the ground. But Arn forbade it. He stood before the priest and his few remaining men, declaring that this was a sacred place, a place of survival, not sacrilege. In this land of ice and silence, all gods were silent now. The return voyage was a lonely ordeal. Storms and misfortune claimed the last of his crew, leaving Arn as the sole survivor. His ship, the Sea Dragon Asterisk, drifted back to the eastern settlement, a battered and empty shell, a ghost ship returning to a dying colony. He was a man who had journeyed to the land of the dead and come back alone. His journal, filled with the account of his voyage and the fate of the western settlement, became the last written record of the Norse in Greenland. He chronicled the slow decline, the fading hope, and the final desperate choice. A century later, a Danish missionary ship finally reached the coast of the eastern settlement. They found only ruins and silence. The fjords were empty, the churches hollowed out by wind and time. On a single weathered stone near the old harbor, the search party found a final, heartbreaking message carved in runes. We waited for spring. It never came. The tale of Arn Thorvaldsen, preserved in his journal and whispered through the generations. became the final haunting chapter of the great Viking expansion that had once stretched from Constantinople to the shores of North America. It was the story of an end, not a glorious battle, but a slow, cold fade into obscurity. Historians and poets would later give him a name, the Last Greenlander. He was the man who stood at the edge of the world and watched as the last embers of the Norse age were extinguished, buried forever under a blanket of snow and silence. In the heart of the Viking Age, where fame was forged in fire and steel, a young war leader named Jarl Sigvald stood before a priest of Odin. Sigvald, leader of the legendary Jomsvikings, was a man who craved a legacy that would echo through eternity. The priest, his face shadowed by the flickering torchlight, offered him a gift not of gold or silver, but of destiny itself, a sacred banner. Woven from dark cloth, it depicted a single, ominous raven, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. This was the Raffensmerki, the Raven Banner. Its power was absolute, a promise whispered on the winds of fate. The army that carried it into battle would know only victory. But this promise was bound by a terrible curse. For every battle won, for every moment of triumph, the man who bore the banner aloft would pay the ultimate price. He would die. Sigvald looked at the banner, its raven seemingly staring back at him from the void. He saw not a curse, but a path to glory. He accepted the dark honor without hesitation, ready to trade life for a saga that would never end. The men Sigvald commanded were no ordinary warriors. They were the Jomsvikings, a brotherhood of elite mercenaries bound not by blood or kingdom, but by a strict and unforgiving code of honor. From their fortress of Jomsborg, their reputation for ferocity and discipline spread across the northern world. They were a force for hire, their swords pledged to the highest bidder, but their loyalty was only to their own laws. They feared no man and no god. Among these iron-willed fighters stood two men of particular renown. There was Be the Thick, a champion of immense strength and a heart devoid of fear, his presence on the battlefield a storm of destruction. And there was Van Cussen, the youngest of their ranks, yet his boldness and ambition burned brighter than any veterans. Together, they and their brethren swore oaths upon their swords to fight for riches, for honor, and for the grim blessing of the Raven Banner. They were a brotherhood united by a shared thirst for glory, ready to follow their Jarl into the heart of any storm. The storm came sooner than they expected. A political feud was brewing in the north, a power struggle that would soon engulf the seas in war. In Norway, Jarl Hakon Sigurdsson ruled with an iron fist, but he had dared to defy the growing might of the Danish kingdom under King Sweyn Forkbeard. Denmark, seeking to crush this Norwegian defiance, looked for allies who knew only how to win. Their gaze fell upon the Jomsvikings. The call to war was answered. Lured by the promise of immense wealth and an easy victory against a lone Norwegian Jarl, Sigvald and his Jomsvikings agreed to join the Danish invasion fleet. They would sail north, confident that with their unmatched skill and the dark magic of the Raven Banner, the lands of Norway would soon fall before them. The sails were hoisted, the prows of their longships turned toward the jagged coastlines of the north, and the Jomsvikings set out to claim another victory. The two fleets finally met in a narrow fjord called Gav. What began as a battle of men soon descended into a war against the elements themselves. Jarl Hakon, cornered and desperate, was not just a ruler. He was said to be a practitioner of the old magic. In a dark ritual, he offered a sacrifice to his patron goddesses, calling upon supernatural forces to aid him. As the Jomsvikings advanced, the sky turned a bruised purple. A storm of unnatural ferocity erupted, lashing the sea into a chaotic frenzy. Hail, as large as stones, hammered down upon the warriors. Ghostly winds tore shields from their grips and snapped masts like twigs. The waves rose into monstrous walls of water, smashing ships against one another in a symphony of splintering wood and drowning screams. Arrows fired from Jam's Viking bows were swallowed by the gales, disappearing uselessly into the maelstrom. It was chaos, a battle against the very sea and sky. Yet, through the howling wind and crashing waves, one thing gave the invaders hope. Each time the Raven banner was raised, its dark wings seeming to beat against the storm, the tide of the battle turned. The Jomsvikings pushed forward, their resolve unbroken. But the banner's power demanded its payment. As the battle raged, the terrible nature of its curse became horrifyingly clear. The first warrior chosen to carry the banner, a man known for his strength, raised it high. The Jomsvikings surged forward, their axes finding their marks. But within moments, a stray arrow found the banner bearer, and he fell dead into the churning water. Another warrior, seizing the falling standard, took his place. He too led a successful charge, only to be cut down by a Norwegian sword. Again and again, the curse claimed its due. Every man who dared to carry the Raven banner into the heart of the fight met a swift and certain end. A chilling fear began to creep into the hearts of these fearless men. The banner, once a symbol of guaranteed victory, was now an instrument of doom. Even Be the Thick and Van Kaysen, who had never known hesitation, now paused. They watched as man after man fell, their moments of glory extinguished as quickly as they began. The staff of the banner became a thing of dread, an object no one dared to touch. The loss of their banner bearers and the unrelenting fury of the storm finally broke the Jomsviking spirit. Their legendary discipline shattered, and their fleet was overwhelmed. The battle was lost. Defeat, a word rarely spoken in Jomsborg, was now a bitter reality. The survivors, including leaders like Jarl Sigvald, Be and Van, were captured and brought ashore to face the victorious Jarl Hakon and his son, Eirik. They were lined up for execution, their hands bound, their epic campaign ending in humiliation. But the Jomsvikings were not broken. As the executioner's axe rose and fell, they faced death not with fear, but with defiant pride. One warrior, when asked if he feared death, famously laughed and said he only worried the executioner's blow might be too slow. Be the Thick refused to be held, staring down his killer without flinching. Van Kaysen, ever bold, made a boast that so impressed his captors that Jarl Eirik himself stepped in and spared his life. Their captors, who had expected pleas for mercy, were instead met with unwavering courage. In their final moments, the Jomsvikings proved that their honor could not be captured or killed. Some were executed, but others were spared, their lives granted out of sheer admiration for their unbreakable spirit. Though the Jomsvikings were defeated at Hjörungave, their saga did not end there. In defeat, they became legends. Their story of the cursed banner, the supernatural storm, and their fearless defiance in the face of death was told and retold in the smoky longhouses of the North for generations. They became the ultimate symbol of the Viking warrior ideal, men who valued honor and glory above life itself. And what of the Raven banner, the catalyst for their doom and glory? It vanished. Some say it sank to the bottom of the fjord, its dark magic finally silenced by the sea. Others whisper that it was taken by the gods, waiting in the mists of time for a new generation of warriors, for those willing to pay fate's ultimate price for a moment of immortal fame. The saga of the Jomsvikings serves as a timeless and stark reminder. It teaches us that victory always has a cost, and that true, lasting fame often demands the greatest sacrifice of all. In the green valleys of Iceland, under the new laws of the Commonwealth, two friends built their lives. Bjorn the Wise, known for his keen mind and mastery of the law, and Thorvald the Strong, a warrior whose fame in battle was unmatched. Their friendship was the bedrock of their community, their households joined by marriage, their lands shared, their respect for one another absolute. They had settled in this peaceful corner of the world, hoping to leave the old ways of endless strife behind. For a time, it seemed they had succeeded. The land prospered, and their families grew, intertwined like the roots of the ancient oaks. The peace was disturbed by the arrival of a new chieftain, Sigrid. She married into Bjorn's extended kin, bringing with her a dowry of land and a heart full of unspoken ambition. There was a shadow in her past, a hidden grudge against Thorvald's family that she kept veiled behind a polite smile. The spark that would ignite the valley was struck at a winter feast. Sigurd's foster brother, a brash young man, was publicly shamed by Thorvald over a small, unpaid debt. In a culture where honor was the highest currency, the insult, though seemingly trivial, was a deep wound. Bjorn, ever the voice of reason, advised restraint and a peaceful resolution. But Thorvald, his warrior's pride stung, would not be placated. He demanded not just payment, but blood. The fledgling legal system of the Commonwealth was put to the test. Chieftains and law speakers gathered to mediate. A settlement was proposed, a sum of silver known as wurgold, calculated to repay the insult and restore honor. Oaths were sworn before the gods to uphold the agreement. Under pressure from Bjorn and the community, Thorvald accepted the silver. But the peace was a fragile one. The whispers of his own men, calling his acceptance a sign of weakness, gnawed at him. Haunted by the perceived slight to his courage, Thorvald hunted down Sigrid's foster brother and slew him in a rage. Bjorn's calm counsel had failed. The first blood had been spilled, and the community began to fracture, its people forced to choose sides. The battle lines were drawn. Sigrid and her kin, seeing their chance, openly declared their support for Thorvald, fueling his thirst for conflict. Her husband's household, loyal to Bjorn and the law, felt the sting of betrayal. The valley, once a symbol of unity, became a battleground. Skirmishes broke out on the frozen rivers, the crisp winter air shattered by the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. The nights were no longer silent. They echoed with screams and the chilling thud of axes against shields and doors. When the chieftains gathered for the annual Althing, the Great Assembly, visitors from other regions tried to mediate the escalating feud. Bjorn, his heart heavy, stood before the assembly and pleaded for a return to peace. But the drums of war were beating too loudly. The feud reached its horrifying climax one cold morning before the dawn. Fueled by vengeance and emboldened by Sigrid's whispers, Thorvald and his men descended upon Bjorn's homestead. They barred the doors and set the great timber hall ablaze. The flames roared, consuming the dry wood with terrifying speed. Trapped inside, many of Bjorn's family and retainers perished in the inferno, including his beloved sons. Bjorn himself was dragged from the fire, but not before the flames had taken his sight and left him gravely wounded. The act was so monstrous, so far beyond the accepted rules of feud, that it horrified even Thorvald's own supporters. Shamed and declared an outlaw by the Althing, Thorvald fled Iceland, vanishing into exile across the sea. Years passed. The valley was scarred, the community broken. Bjorn, now blind and frail, lived with the ghosts of his past. But vengeance has a long memory. His daughter, who had survived the fire, married a strong chieftain from the south. Their son, Eric, grew up hearing the tale of the burning, the loss of his uncles, and the blinding of his grandfather. A fire for justice burned in his heart. When he came of age, Eric swore an oath to avenge his family's honor. His quest took him across the storm-tossed seas to the Orkney Islands, then back through the treacherous fjords of Norway, always on Thorvald's trail. He gathered allies, men who respected the rule of law and were appalled by the breaking of it. The long pursuit showed Eric how the poison of a feud could drive men to the ends of the earth. At long last, he cornered the aging Thorvald. The final duel was not just for personal revenge, but for the honor of his grandfather and the very law of the land that Thorvald had so brutally defied. In the end, Eric's youth and righteous fury overcame Thorvald's legendary strength. The old warrior was slain. Eric returned home, Not with triumph, but with a heavy heart, the burden of vengeance finally lifted. At the next Althing, the blind and ancient Bjorn held a final solemn ceremony. He stood before the assembled chieftains, his scarred face a testament to the cost of hatred. Peace was formally declared. Final settlements were paid, not in anger, but in reconciliation. The long, bloody feud was officially ended. The valley began to heal. New generations were born, and they were taught the story of Bjorn and Thorvald, a lesson that even vengeance sought for a just cause leaves a fire that can consume everything and must in the end be quenched by mercy and law. The story became a saga, sung by poets in the halls of chieftains for generations to come. The songs told of Bjorn the Wise, who valued law above all, Thorvald the Strong, whose pride became his downfall, and Eric the Avenger, who restored his family's honor but learned the bitter taste of revenge. Their tale became a stark warning. Laws are built to protect us from ourselves, while feuds and vengeance will ruin all they touch. In the field where Bjorn's great hall once stood, a single tall stone was raised. It marked the place of the fire, a silent, enduring reminder of the terrible cost of honor and the flame of vengeance that had nearly destroyed them all. Before Columbus, before the age of sail and empire, a Viking longship sliced through the cold, gray waters of the North Atlantic. At its helm stood a man born of ice and saga, his eyes fixed on a horizon no European had ever crossed. This is the story of that man, Leif Erikson, the Norse explorer who sailed into a new world centuries before the rest of Europe even knew it existed. This is the saga of Leif the Lucky. Born around the year 970 CE, Leif was forged in the unforgiving landscape of Greenland. He was the son of a legend, Eric the Red, the fiery Norseman who, after being exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, established the first European settlement on that vast, icy island. Growing up on this rugged frontier was a harsh education. The world was a canvas of towering glaciers, windswept fjords, and the ever-present roaring sea. From his youth, Leif learned the essential skills of a Viking frontiersman: how to navigate by the sun and stars, how to survive in a land of brutal winters, and how to read the whispers of the wind. The stories of his ancestors, tales of gods and giants, exploration and conquest, were in his blood. He inherited his father's restless spirit, the insatiable Viking hunger for what lay beyond the known world. As a young man, Leif's journey took him eastward, back toward the heart of the Norse world. He sailed to Norway, a kingdom undergoing a profound transformation under its ambitious ruler, King Olaf I Tryggvason. In the royal court, Leif, the son of a staunch pagan, came face to face with a powerful new force sweeping across Scandinavia: Christianity. King Olaf, a zealous convert, was determined to bring all of Norway and its territories under the banner of the cross. Leif, perhaps through conviction, political necessity, or a mix of both, was converted and baptized. King Olaf then entrusted him with a monumental task: to return to Greenland and introduce Christianity to its people, including his own father, Eric the Red. Leif set sail for home, now a man caught between two worlds. Within him was the ancient heritage of Odin and Thor, the pagan gods of his forefathers, now intertwined with the new faith of Christ. This internal tension, this duality of belief and identity, would shape the man who was about to sail into history. Upon his return to Greenland, winds of change followed. While his mother, Thjodhild, embraced the new faith and even built the first church in Greenland, his father, Eric the Red, remained defiantly pagan. But other stories were also swirling in the salt-sprayed air of the settlement. A Norse trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson, years earlier, had been blown off course while sailing from Iceland to Greenland. He reported sighting strange, unknown lands to the westlands covered in forests and gentle hills, a stark contrast to Greenland's icy shores. He had not landed, but his tale ignited the imagination of the Greenlanders. Leif, ever the explorer, was captivated. Seized by the call of the unknown, he purchased Bjarni's sturdy Nair, a type of Viking cargo ship, assembled a crew of 35 seasoned sailors, and prepared to chase the rumor. In the autumn, around the year 1000 CE, they raised their sail and steered their vessel west into the uncharted vastness of the Atlantic. After days at sea, their first sight of land was a desolate expanse of flat rock and glaciers, which they fittingly named Helluland, or Land of Flat Stones, believed today to be Baffin Island. Sailing south, they came upon a second coast, this one flat and wooded with white sandy beaches. They called it Markland, or Forest Land, likely the coast of modern-day Labrador. But they pressed on, driven by the promise of a more hospitable shore. Finally, they landed in a place that seemed like a paradise. The air was milder, the rivers teemed with the largest salmon they had ever seen, and the forests were thick with valuable timber, a resource desperately scarce in Greenland. Most astonishingly, they discovered wild grapes growing in abundance, a fruit unknown in their northern homelands. Overjoyed by this discovery, Leif named the region Vinland, the land of wine. This lush, green shore, believed to be located in what is now Newfoundland, Canada, was their destination. As winter approached, the Norse crew knew they could not risk a return journey across the treacherous autumn seas. They decided to stay. On a strategic promontory near a lake, they constructed a small settlement, building several large turf-walled longhouses to shelter them from the coming cold. This encampment, which archaeologists now believe to be the site of Longzhu Meadows in Newfoundland, became the first European settlement in the Americas. The winter was unlike any they had experienced in Greenland. The frost was mild, and cattle could graze outdoors. The days and nights were of a more equal length, a strange astronomical observation they noted carefully. They spent their months harvesting the wild grapes to make wine, felling timber to load their ship, and fishing the bountiful rivers. Yet, this new world was not without its anxieties. It was a land far from home, a place where the sea seemed to roar with a different voice and the winds carried unfamiliar scents. More ominously, they were not alone. The land was inhabited by indigenous peoples, whom the Norse called Skrælings. Though initial encounters were not recorded as violent during Leif's stay, the shadow of potential conflict, of hostility from the land's original inhabitants, loomed over their small, isolated camp. When spring arrived, Leif and his crew loaded their ship to the gunwales with timber, dried grapes, and other resources from Vinland. They set sail for home, their minds full of the wonders they had seen. The return journey cemented Leif's reputation and earned him his famous moniker. En route, he spotted a shipwreck and rescued the stranded Icelandic crew, recovering their valuable cargo. For this act of fortune and seamanship, he was forever known as Leif the Lucky. Back in Greenland, he was met as a hero. The news of Vinland and the wealth of resources it held brought him great prestige. Following the death of his father, Eric, Leif became one of the chief figures in the Greenland settlement, a respected leader responsible for its governance and prosperity. His voyage, however, remained a singular achievement. Subsequent Norse expeditions to Vinland, including one led by his own brother, were plagued by internal disputes and violent conflicts with the native population. Ultimately, the Norse failed to establish a permanent colony in North America. The distance was too great, the supply lines too long, and the resistance from the Skrælings too fierce. But the story of Leif's voyage endured, passed down through generations in the great Icelandic sagas. Leif Erikson's legacy is monumental. His daring exploration to the shores of North America occurred nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus set sail, fundamentally changing our understanding of transatlantic contact and Norse expansion. For centuries, his story was confined to the pages of medieval sagas, dismissed by many as mere folklore. But in the 1960s, the archaeological discovery of the Norse settlement at Longzhu Meadows provided stunning physical evidence, transforming legend into documented history. Scholars now widely regard Leif Erikson as the first European to have set foot on the continent of North America. His name echoes not just in sagas and academic texts, but in the cultural memory of the modern world. Statues honor his achievement in Iceland, Greenland, and North America. His voyage is a testament to the incredible skill, courage, and adventurous spirit of the Norse people. The saga of Leif the Lucky is more than just a historical footnote. It is a powerful reminder that the story of discovery is often more complex and ancient than we imagine. He was a Viking, a Christian, an explorer, and the lord of a new yet temporary world. His journey across the ocean is a timeless epic of human curiosity and the enduring quest to see what lies beyond the horizon. The Viking Age was an era of warriors, explorers, and kings, but few embodied all these roles as completely as Harald Sigurdsson, later known as Harald Hardrada, or the Hard Ruler. His life was a sprawling saga of exile, warfare, and ambition that stretched from the icy fjords of Norway to the golden halls of Constantinople and ended on a bloody field in England. Harald's story is not just the tale of one man. It is the final dramatic chapter of the Viking Age itself, a testament to a world on the brink of profound change. His journey from a young exile to a feared king would reshape his homeland and leave an indelible mark on European history. Harald's saga began in the midst of turmoil. Growing up in the Norwegian court, he was thrust into conflict at a young age. In 1030, at just 15 years old, he fought alongside his half-brother, King Olaf II, at the Battle of Stiklestad. The battle was a disaster. Olaf was killed, and his forces were defeated, forcing the young Harald, wounded and defeated, to flee his homeland. This early taste of failure, however, did not break him. It forged him. He journeyed eastward, a political refugee seeking fortune and a path back to power. His travels eventually led him to the heart of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christendom. In Constantinople, Harald found his calling. He joined the Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Norse mercenaries who served as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor. Here, amidst the splendor and intrigue of the imperial court, Harald's reputation grew. He was no longer just a boy in exile. He was a formidable warrior, a brilliant commander, and a shrewd leader. He fought in campaigns across the Mediterranean, from Sicily to the Holy Land, amassing immense wealth and invaluable military experience. The Varangian Guard was his training ground, transforming the fugitive prince into a seasoned general, known for his tactical skill and ruthless efficiency. By the time he left the empire, he was one of the most famous and feared soldiers of his time, with a fortune vast enough to fund an army and a reputation that preceded him across Europe. Around 1046, after more than a decade in exile, Harald decided the time was right to return home. He sailed back to Norway, not as a refugee, but as a contender for the throne, his ships laden with the gold he had earned in the east. Norway was then ruled by his nephew, Magnus the Good. Rather than challenge him directly in a costly civil war, Harald used his wealth and influence to strike a deal. He became co-king with Magnus, agreeing to share both the rule of Norway and his vast treasury. This arrangement, however, was short-lived. Just a year later, in 1047, Magnus died under mysterious circumstances, leaving Harald as the sole and undisputed king of Norway. As king, Harald applied the same ruthless determination that had served him so well as a mercenary. He was now Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, a name that reflected his stern and uncompromising governance. He immediately set about transforming Norway. To strengthen the economy and centralize his authority, he introduced a national coinage system, a significant step towards a modern state. He consolidated power, ruthlessly crushing any regional lords who dared to challenge his rule, and built a stronger, more unified kingdom. His reforms weren't just internal. He sought to re-establish Norway's standing on the world stage, using his wealth and military might to project power and secure his nation's place within the wider European political landscape. With Norway firmly under his control, Harald's ambition turned outward. He believed he had a legitimate claim to the Danish throne through the agreement he had made with Magnus. For nearly 2 decades, he waged a relentless and draining war against King Sweyn II of Denmark. This long conflict was marked by constant raiding and brutal naval warfare. The climax came in 1062 at the Battle of Nisk, a massive and bloody sea battle fought off the coast of modern-day Sweden. Harald's forces were victorious, shattering the Danish fleet and solidifying his reputation as a master naval commander. Though he won the battle, the war had failed to secure him the Danish crown, leaving him frustrated and searching for a new prize worthy of his ambition. That prize appeared in 1066. The throne of England became vacant, and Harald saw his ultimate opportunity. He was not the only claimant, but he had a powerful ally, Tostig Godwinson, the estranged brother of the newly crowned English king Harold Godwinson. Together, they forged an alliance to invade England. In September 1066, Harald Hardrada sailed his fleet across the North Sea, a grand Viking invasion, the likes of which had not been seen for generations. He landed in northern England, catching the English by surprise. At the Battle of Fulford, just outside the city of York, Harold's veteran Norse army crushed the northern English forces. Victory seemed within his grasp. The city of York surrendered, and Harold stood as the conqueror of the north, poised to march south and claim the entire kingdom. But his triumph was fleeting. Just 5 days after his victory at Fulford, Harold's army was caught completely off guard. The English king, Harold Godwinson, had accomplished an incredible feat, marching his army north from London at astonishing speed. On September 25, 1066, the English forces surprised the Norsemen at a river crossing called Stamford Bridge. Many of Harold's men had left their armor back at their ships, not expecting a fight. What followed was a desperate and savage battle. Legend says Harold fought like a berserker, cutting down his enemies with his great two-handed sword. But his luck had finally run out. An arrow struck him in the throat, and the great warrior king fell. His death shattered the morale of his army, and the Norse invasion was annihilated. This catastrophic defeat at Stamford Bridge is widely considered the symbolic end of the Viking Age. The era of grand Scandinavian invasions of England was over. With Harold's death, Norway was fundamentally changed. His rule had been harsh, but it had been effective. He left behind a kingdom that was more centralized and more connected to the rest of Europe than ever before. The days of disparate Viking chieftains were numbered, replaced by a more unified, state-like monarchy. His legacy was not just one of a warrior, but of a nation builder who bridged the gap between the old Viking world and the new medieval Europe. He was the last of the great Viking kings, a figure whose life was a saga of wandering, conquest, and power. The epithet Hardrada, or hard ruler, perfectly captures the essence of Harold. It speaks to his stern justice, his demanding leadership, and his unyielding will. He was a man shaped by violence and exile, who used those experiences to forge a kingdom and a legend. His story is a powerful blend of history and myth, a tale of a Viking warrior who became a Byzantine commander, a king who reshaped a nation, and an invader whose death marked the closing of an iconic chapter in world history. Harald Hardrada remains a towering figure, a symbol of the fierce ambition, daring exploration, and brutal warfare that defined the Viking Age and the very last of his kind. This is the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, a Viking of Iceland. He was a poet and a warrior, a man whose life was a contradiction of savage violence and sublime art. His story, told in the pages of Egil's Saga *, is a cornerstone of Icelandic literature, a portrait of a man who embodied the Viking spirit in all its brutal and brilliant complexity. This is the tale of a berserker poet, a killer and a creator, whose legacy is etched into the very soul of the North. Egil's story begins not with him, but with the blood of his ancestors in the fjords of Norway. His lineage was one of formidable, often fearsome men. His grandfather was Ulfr, a man so large and strong that he was known as Gweldolf, or Evening Volf, because as the day waned, his temper would grow fierce and unpredictable, leading many to believe he was a shapeshifter. Kullolf was a landowner of great influence, a man who valued his independence above all else. His son, and Egil's father, was Skallagrim, a man who inherited his father's strength and stern, uncompromising nature. He was dark, bald, and imposing, a man of few words but swift action. This family, the Makramen clan, thrived on their own terms, wary of the centralizing ambitions of kings. Their fierce independence inevitably led them into conflict with the growing power of the Norwegian crown. King Harald Fairhair, the first to unite Norway under a single rule, demanded fealty and taxes, things Kodulf and Skallagrim were unwilling to give freely. After a series of escalating conflicts, including the king's men killing one of Skallagrim's brothers, and Skallagrim retaliating by killing two of the king's sister cousins, the family's position in Norway became untenable. Seeing no future but one of endless war or subjugation, Skallagrim, along with his aging father Kodulf, gathered their household and possessions and set sail from their ancestral lands. They followed the path of many other independent-minded Norwegians, heading west across the cold sea to the newfound land of Iceland. Kveldulf died on the voyage, but Skallagrim made landfall and established a large settlement at Borg, carving out a new life for his clan in the rugged, volcanic landscape. It was here, in this land of fire and ice, that his son Egil was born, a child of exile, destined to carry the family's defiant spirit into a new generation. From his earliest years, Egil was no ordinary child. He was large for his age, with the same dark, brooding features as his father, and possessed a temperament that swung wildly between sullen silence and explosive rage. The two sides of his future self, the warrior and the poet, manifested with shocking precocity. At the age of just 3, his father refused to take him to a feast, deeming him too unruly. Undeterred, the toddler found a horse, rode to the feast himself, and upon arrival was so well received for his audacity that he was invited to compose a poem, which he did on the spot. This was the birth of the Skald. The berserker was not far behind. A few years later, at age 7, while playing a ball game, a dispute with an older boy ended with Egil being struck. His response was not to cry or run home, but to find an axe and split the boy's skull, committing his first killing before he was even old enough to be considered a man. This shocking act revealed the dual nature that would define his entire life. In the Viking Age, men were often one thing or the other. They were warriors who fought for wealth and honor, or they were skalds, the court poets who crafted intricate verses to celebrate the deeds of those warriors. It was exceptionally rare for one man to be a master of both. Yet Egil was. His hands were equally skilled at gripping the hilt of a sword and at weaving the complex kennings and metaphors of skaldic poetry. He could compose a verse of dazzling beauty one moment and disembowel an enemy the next. This unusual combination made him an object of both fear and fascination, a man who navigated the world through both brute force and intellectual genius. His poetry was not a gentle art. It was a weapon, as sharp and deadly as his axe, used to praise his friends, insult his enemies, and bargain for his own life. The animosity that drove Skallagrim from Norway did not die with the journey to Iceland. It was inherited by Egil as a birthright. The primary target of this generational feud was King Harald Fairhair and his favored son, Eirik Bloodaxe. The conflict was constant and personal, a series of violent confrontations that spanned decades and crossed kingdoms. Egil's life became a tapestry of vendettas against Eirik and his formidable queen, Gunhild. These were not simply battles fought on a field. They were dramatic, outrageous acts of defiance. At one feast, Egil, feeling insulted, became murderously drunk, killed one of the king's men, and made a daring escape. On another occasion, suspecting a poisoned drinking horn was being offered to him, he carved magical runes onto it, causing the horn to shatter, and then proceeded to kill the man responsible. His defiance of Eirik Bloodaxe reached its zenith in Norway. After being declared an outlaw, Egil did not flee in shame. Instead, before sailing away, he landed on an island, erected a 9-sting escorn pole. He mounted a horse's head on the top, pointed it towards the mainland, and spoke a formal curse, a poem invoking the spirits of the land to drive King Eirik and Queen Gunhild from the kingdom. This was not mere superstition. It was a profound act of psychological and magical warfare. Whether by magic or by the tide of politics, Eirik was indeed later driven from Norway, a victory Egil claimed as his own. Egil's life was a cycle of provocation, violence, and escape, always living on the edge. His wits and his sword his only true allies against the power of kings. Seeking fortune and a respite from his Norwegian feuds, Egil's path led him abroad to the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of England. There, he and his beloved brother Thorolf entered the service of King Aethelstan, a powerful and successful monarch. In England, Egil's prowess as a warrior found a new and profitable stage. He fought as a mercenary in the king's army, most notably at the monumental Battle of Brunanburh in 937. This was a massive, bloody conflict where Aethelstan's forces clashed with a combined army of Scots, Britons, and Norsemen from Dublin. Egil fought with his characteristic ferocity, leading his men from the front and playing a key role in the English victory. The battle, however, came at a great personal cost. His brother Thorolf was killed in the fighting, a loss that devastated Egil. In the aftermath, as King Aethelstan rewarded his victorious commanders, Egil sat silent and grim, his face a mask of grief. The king, recognizing his sorrow, offered him a generous payment of gold and silver in compensation for his brother's death, as was the custom. Egil accepted the wealth, but the experience solidified his view of the warrior's life. A path to riches and renown, but one paved with sorrow and loss. He composed a powerful poem mourning his brother, and with his honor proven and his coffers full, he eventually left the king's service. His reputation as one of the great warriors of his age now firmly established far beyond the shores of Iceland and Norway. After a lifetime of roving and raiding, feuding and fighting, an aging Egil finally returned to Iceland to live out his final years. A fire of his youth had not been extinguished, but it now burned within a failing body. He grew old, frail, and blind, living at the farm of his adopted daughter. Yet, even in his decline, the old berserker poet remained a formidable and cantankerous presence. He was a living legend, the embodiment of a passing age. The savagery that had driven him to kill a boy at age 7 was still there, simmering beneath the surface. In one famous episode, frustrated by his blindness and the perceived disrespect of the household, he complained of being cold and was told to move closer to the fire. In his final years, he famously took the 2 chests of English silver he had earned from King Aethelstan and, with the help of 2 slaves, buried them in a secret location near his home, killing the slaves afterward to ensure the secret of his treasure died with him. Despite his cantankerous end, Egil's ultimate legacy was not his buried silver, but his immortal words. His greatest poems, such as the Asterisk, Heffelhausen Asterisk, Head Ransom, composed to save his own life from his enemy Eirik Bloodaxe, and the Asterisk Sanatorek Asterisk, Lament for My Sons, a profound and heartbreaking poem of grief after losing 2 of his children, are masterpieces of Old Norse literature. They reveal the soul of the man beneath the warrior's armor, a man capable of deep love, profound sorrow, and existential despair. Egil Skallagrimsson died an old man, but his story did not end there. His clan thrived in Iceland, becoming one of its most powerful families. His poems were memorized and retold, passing from one generation to the next until they were finally written down. Through the saga that bears his name, the Viking who was both a monster and a genius, a killer and a poet, achieved a kind of immortality, his voice echoing down through the centuries as a testament to the wild, contradictory spirit of his age. Her story is not one of kings or warriors, but of a woman who walked to the edge of the known world and beyond. Her name was Gudrid the Far Traveler, and her saga is one of the most remarkable journeys of the Viking Age, a testament to the spirit of exploration that defined her people. Gudrid's story begins in Iceland during a time of immense hardship. The land was choked by famine and darkened by volcanic ash, a harsh environment that forged resilience in its people. From a young age, Gudrid was known not just for her beauty, but for her sharp mind and unwavering determination. Yet, a shadow of prophecy hung over her. Osiris had foretold a great but complex destiny, a path that would lead her far from the familiar shores of her homeland. This mysterious fate set her apart, marking her as someone destined for extraordinary things, for better or for worse. It was a burden and a promise, a whisper of the incredible journeys that awaited her across the vast, uncharted waters of the world. The first great turn in her life came when her father, Thorbjorn, decided to join an ambitious expedition. The famed Eric the Red was leading a new wave of colonists to a vast, icy land he called Greenland. For Gudrid, this was the beginning of her travels. The voyage across the North Atlantic was a brutal trial by ice and water. Ferocious storms battered the small fleet of longships, and the unforgiving sea claimed several vessels, swallowing them whole. Gudrid's ship was among the survivors, and she arrived in the stark, new colony having already faced death. In this rugged frontier society, she quickly distinguished herself, not with a sword, but with a quiet strength and calm leadership that earned the respect of the hardened Norse settlers. Life in Greenland was a constant struggle for survival. Gudrid soon married Thorstein, the youngest son of Eric the Red, linking her to the most powerful family in the colony. But happiness was fleeting in this harsh land. A devastating epidemic swept through the settlement, and disease claimed many lives, including that of her husband Thorstein. Gudrid herself fell gravely ill, but managed to survive, a widow in a land of ice and sorrow. While many would have been broken by such loss, Gudrid's spirit remained unyielding. Instead of succumbing to grief, she looked to the horizon. Her husband's dream had been to sail even further west to find a rumored land of plenty. Now, she would make that dream her own, vowing to continue the journey into the unknown. Her resolve led her to her second marriage, this time to a wealthy Icelandic merchant and seasoned adventurer named Thorfinn Karlsifni. He shared her ambition and possessed the resources to make it a reality. Together, they organized and led a daring new expedition, gathering settlers, livestock, and supplies for a voyage beyond Greenland. They sailed west, following the tailies of Leif Erikson, into the vast emptiness of the ocean. Their destination was Vinland, the land of wine, a place we now know as North America. When they finally made landfall, they discovered a world beyond their wildest dreams. It was a land of towering forests, lush meadows, and wild grapes growing in abundance. The fertile soil and rich resources promised a new permanent home, a true paradise compared to the barren landscapes of Greenland and Iceland. Here, in this new world, the Norse encountered its native inhabitants, people they called Skrælings. The initial interactions were peaceful and filled with curiosity. The Norse, including Gudrid, engaged in trade, exchanging red cloth and milk for valuable furs. For a brief time, it seemed as if two different worlds could coexist. However, these peaceful beginnings soon frayed. Cultural misunderstandings, mutual fear, and the inherent tensions of a new settlement created a fragile peace that could not last. A sudden, violent conflict erupted, and though the Norse fought fiercely, they were vastly outnumbered. Karlsefni and his people were forced to accept a bitter truth. Vinland, for all its bounty, could not yet be held. Their dream of a permanent settlement had to be abandoned. Despite the ultimate failure of the colony, a momentous event occurred during their time in Vinland. Gudrid gave birth to a son, Snorri Thorfinnsson. He was the first known European child born in the Americas, a living symbol of this extraordinary chapter in exploration. His birth in this distant, wild land represented a bridge between the old world and the new. Though the family would not stay, Snorri's existence became a powerful symbol of hope and the far-reaching ambition of his people. His story, intertwined with his mother's, became a legacy of what was possible, a tale of a new generation born at the farthest edge of the Viking world. With the Vinland settlement no longer viable, Gudrid, Karlsefni, and their young son Snorri made the long and arduous journey back across the Atlantic. They returned first to Greenland, and then to their ancestral home in Iceland, their ships laden with valuable timber and furs from the New World. Their tales of the distant West became the stuff of legend, inspiring awe and wonder. Snorri grew up in Iceland, and true to the promise of his remarkable birth, he became a respected and influential figure in his own right, continuing the family's legacy of leadership. Gudrid, however, felt the pull of a different purpose. Having raised her family and seen worlds others could only dream of, her restless spirit sought a final personal journey. In her later years, with her children grown and her husband passed, Gudrid undertook her most astonishing voyage yet. Traveling alone, she embarked on a pilgrimage to Rome, the heart of Christian Europe. For a Norse woman of her time, this was an almost unimaginable undertaking, a journey spanning thousands of miles across foreign lands and seas. It was perhaps the farthest journey ever recorded by a woman of her era. After returning to Iceland from this final great adventure, Gudrid became a nun, retreating to a quiet life of reflection. In the solitude of the cloister, this woman who had crossed oceans and seen the birth of a new world dedicated her final years to her faith, her life a tapestry of incredible contrasts. Her descendants, carrying the blood of the first European born in America, would go on to shape Icelandic history for centuries, with lineages tracing to powerful bishops and even European nobility. Gudrid's name was never forgotten. The Skalds, the great poets of the North, immortalized her with a title that perfectly captured her life, the Far Traveler. She was the woman who had walked the world. Her saga endures not as a tale of conquest, but as a powerful reminder of the true nature of the Viking spirit. Her story proves that these were not just raiders and warriors, but also farmers, traders, explorers, and pioneers. They were men and women of incredible courage and vision, who dared to sail beyond the horizon in search of a new life. And among them, Gudrid stands as one of the greatest travelers of all. In the late 10th century, Norway was not a single kingdom, but a patchwork of territories ruled by powerful chieftains known as jarls. In the northern region of Trøndelag, one man stood as a bulwark against the changing tides of faith and power, Jarl Khan of Lade. As the influence of Christianity crept northward from continental Europe, Khan remained a staunch defender of the old gods Odin, Thor, and the pantheon of Asgard. The Norse Sagas, our primary window into this tumultuous era, paint a complex portrait of him. To his people, he was a revered protector, a leader whose strength ensured their safety and prosperity. To his enemies, he was a feared and ruthless ruler, a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his authority and preserve the ancient traditions. His name was whispered with a mixture of respect and fear, a testament to his formidable presence in a divided land. While Han fortified the pagan north, a new challenger was rising in the west. Olaf Tryggvason, a descendant of Norway's first king, Harald Farer, was returning to his homeland with a singular divine mission. Having been baptized in England, Olaf was now a fervent Christian, determined to unite Norway under one king and one God. He arrived not just with a claim to the throne, but with the conviction that he was an instrument of God's will. His message resonated with many clans who were weary of the constant infighting among the Jarls. Secretly, allegiances began to shift. Chieftains and farmers promised wealth, land, and the favor of a powerful new deity, quietly pledged their support to the returning king. Spies brought Khan unsettling news. Olaf was gathering a fleet of longships larger and more formidable than any seen since the days of Harald Fairhair himself. A storm was gathering, and it was headed directly for Khan's domain. The pressure on Jarl Khan mounted with each passing day. He struggled to maintain the loyalty of his fellow Jarls and the farmers who formed the backbone of his army. Whispers of Olaf's promises and the might of his growing fleet sowed doubt and fear among Hans's allies. Some began to question whether the old gods were still strong enough to protect them from this new threat. Amidst this uncertainty, Khan's son, Eirik Håkonsson, a fierce and proven commander in his own right, urged his father to take decisive action. Eirik argued for open war, believing that a swift, powerful strike was the only way to crush Olaf's ambitions before they could take root. At the same time, the pagan priests, sensing the wavering faith of the people, delivered a grim warning. They declared that the gods were displeased and demanded stronger devotion. To win their favor and turn back the Christian tide, great sacrifices had to be made. The inevitable conflict soon erupted into a brutal war of faith and power. Olaf's fleets, flying banners emblazoned with the cross, swept along the Norwegian coast. They captured village after village, tearing down the wooden idols of Thor and Odin and replacing them with the symbols of Christianity. Churches were built where pagan temples once stood, and the people were given a stark choice: convert or face the sword. In response, Jarl Khan launched a series of vicious counterattacks. Using his intimate knowledge of the jagged coastline and its treacherous fjords, he led cunning night raids, his longships emerging from the darkness to strike at Olaf's forces. He managed to reclaim some territories, but the cost was high. The common farmers found themselves caught in the middle of a war that was not just for land, but for their very souls. They were torn between loyalty to the gods their ancestors had worshipped for centuries and the allure of joining a powerful new king who promised salvation and stability. As the war raged on, the greatest threat to Khan emerged not from the battlefield, but from within the walls of his own longhouse. Whispers of rebellion, once faint, now grew into a chorus of dissent. A favored servant, a man Khan had trusted implicitly, secretly aligned himself with Olaf Tryggvason. Motivated by promises of power and status in the new Christian kingdom, this servant worked from the inside, turning key families and warriors against their Jarl. Betrayed by those closest to him, Khan's authority crumbled. The great pagan ruler was forced to flee, his own men now hunting him. The sagas record his ultimate humiliation. Khan, the mighty Jarl of Lade, was forced into hiding in a pigsty on a remote farm, a disgraceful end for a man who once commanded the loyalty of the North. With his father in hiding, Eirik Håkonsson desperately tried to rally the remaining loyalist warriors. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, but it was too late. Olaf's campaign of conversion was spreading across the land like wildfire. The promise of a unified kingdom under a single, triumphant god was a powerful force that few could resist. The old ways were dying. Soon, Khan was hunted down in his squalid hiding place and killed. His end was both tragic and dishonorable, a stark symbol of the fall of the old order. Across Norway, the banners of Odin and Thor, which had flown over the fjords for centuries, were lowered for the last time. In their place, the Christian cross was raised, marking the dawn of a new era for the Norse people. The last great pagan power in Norway had been extinguished. Eirik Håkonsson, however, refused to bend the knee. He would not serve the man who had brought about his father this humiliating death and the downfall of their gods. Gathering the few loyal ships and warriors who remained, he set sail from Norway, becoming an exile. He sought refuge in the Viking strongholds of Denmark and England, where powerful rulers were wary of Olaf's growing influence. In the halls of foreign kings, Eirik nursed his grief and plotted his revenge. He vowed that he would one day return to Norway, not just to reclaim his family's lands and titles, but to restore his father's honor. This vow of vengeance would not be an empty one. Eirik's exile set the stage for one of the most legendary naval conflicts in Viking history, the Battle of Svolder, where he would finally confront Olaf Tryggvason and attempt to settle the blood debt between their families. In the years that followed, the bards and skalds of Scandinavia sang conflicting tales of Jarl Khan's life and fall. In some songs, he was remembered as a cruel tyrant, a lecherous ruler whose hubris and brutality led to his own well-deserved demise. These were the stories favored by the new Christian kings, a narrative that justified Olaf's conquest and painted the old pagan ways as barbaric. But other sagas told a different story. In the halls of those who secretly clung to the old beliefs, Khan was immortalized as the last great defender of ancient Norse faith, a tragic hero who fought to the bitter end to protect his people as heritage from foreign influence. His story became a powerful symbol of the great turning point in Scandinavian history, the dramatic and often violent transition where the old gods were dethroned by kings, and an ancient culture was forever changed. Under the strange glow of a lunar eclipse, a quiet fell over the fjord village. It was not the usual peace of the night. This was a deep, unnatural silence. One by one, every person in the village fell into a profound sleep, as if touched by a spell they could not resist. The fires in the hearths burned low. The dogs stopped barking, and the world seemed to hold its breath, caught in the moon's shadow. The eclipse passed, and the stars returned to their rightful places in the sky, but the village remained frozen in its slumber. When the first light of dawn touched the snow-capped peaks, only one person stirred. Her name was Yrsa, a young healer known for the silver scar that cut across her eye, a mark left by a childhood accident. As she woke, a strange feeling washed over her. The silence was too complete, too heavy. Then, carried on the wind from the distant mountains, she heard them. Faint whispers, calling her name, pulling her toward the cold, high peaks. Yrsa walked through the silent streets of her home, her heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. She went from longhouse to longhouse, her footsteps the only sound in a village frozen in time. Inside, she found her friends and family, their chests rising and falling with shallow breaths, but they were lost in a sleep no remedy could break. She tried shaking them, calling their names and burning sacred herbs, but nothing worked. The villagers were trapped somewhere between life and death, their spirits locked away. Yrsa felt a heavy weight settle on her shoulders. She looked at her reflection in a pail of water, at the silver scar that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. She believed this was no random curse. The gods had chosen her for a reason, marking her for a task that only she could complete. Desperate for answers, she sought out a wandering Velva, an old seeress who was rumored to read the threads of fate. The Volva looked at Yrsa with ancient eyes and revealed a cryptic prophecy. To reclaim the sun of life, you must embrace the moon of death. With the seeress's words echoing in her mind, Yrsa knew she could not stay. She had to venture into the wild north, toward the mountains where the whispers originated. She packed a small bag with herbs and a waterskin, her healer's instincts mixing with a newfound, terrifying purpose. She was not alone for long. The first to join her was Eirik, a warrior known as Bare Heart for his immense strength. But beneath his powerful exterior, he was tormented by a crippling guilt over a past battle where he was the sole survivor. He felt the curse was a punishment he deserved, and hoped to find redemption by helping Yrsa. Soon after, they met Frey, a young thrall who had recently escaped a cruel master. Frey possessed a rare gift, the ability to speak with animals, and the creatures of the forest guided him to Yrsa's path. He saw a chance for true freedom in her quest, a way to forge his own destiny. Each of them carried a personal burden, a deep wound in their soul that was mysteriously connected to the sleeping sickness that had claimed the village. Together, the three companions of fate turned their faces to the north and began their journey. Their path led them onto the dead roads, forgotten trails that were only visible under the pale light of the moon. These were not ordinary paths. They were haunted by the spirits of the dishonored dead, souls who were denied entry to the afterlife. The air grew cold, and ghostly figures drifted through the ancient trees, their mournful cries filling the night. To pass, the spirits demanded a toll, but they did not want gold or food. They wanted memories. As Yrsa, Eric, and Frey traveled deeper into the spectral realm, they found pieces of their past being stripped away. Eric began to forget the faces of the comrades he had lost, their names turning to smoke on his tongue. Frey struggled to remember the warmth of his mother's smile. Yrsa, too, felt the drain, her childhood memories becoming blurry and distant. It was during a confrontation with a powerful spirit that Yrsa learned the truth. The curse was not a random act of divine anger. It stemmed from a broken oath, an ancient promise made between her own ancestors and the forgotten goddess of the moon. Her bloodline was at the very heart of the village's suffering. Following the whispers that had grown stronger with each step, the companions finally arrived at their destination, a colossal glacier mountain that pierced the clouds. Hidden deep within the ice was a half-forgotten temple, its walls carved with glowing runes that pulsed with an otherworldly light. The air inside was still and ancient, filled with the scent of cold stone and magic. As they ventured into the central chamber, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a priestess, her skin as pale as fresh snow, and her eyes reflecting the endless stars of the night sky. She offered them salvation for the village, but her smile hinted at a terrible price. Before the choice could be made, the temple tested them. Eric was thrown into a vivid vision, forced to relive the battle that had haunted him for years, facing the accusing specters of his fallen comrades. Frey, in turn, was confronted by a spectral form of his old master, whose cruel words sought to drag him back into the despair of his former life. They had to face their deepest fears to prove they were worthy of an audience with the goddess herself. After surviving their trials, the Lunar Queen finally appeared before them, her presence filling the temple with a cold silver light. She was beautiful and terrifying, the moon personified. With a voice that was both melodic and as sharp as ice, she revealed the whole truth. Long ago, Yrsa's ancestors, who were powerful mages, had entered this very temple and stolen a fragment of sacred magic from the goddess to bring prosperity to their village. This act of theft created a deep wound in the cosmic balance. The curse was not a punishment, but a consequence, the goddess's attempt to reclaim what was hers. To heal the world and save her people, the stolen magic had to be returned, but it had become intertwined with Yrsa's own bloodline. The goddess presented the choice. Yrsa must sacrifice her own soul and mortal existence to become the moon as eternal guardian, binding her spirit to the temple forever. This was the only way to sever the connection and release the villagers. If she refused, her people would not just die. They would wither away into nothing, their memory completely erased from the world as if they had never existed at all. Standing before the goddess, Yrsa looked into the cosmic abyss reflected in her eyes. She thought of her mother and father, of the children she used to treat for fevers, and the elders whose stories she loved to hear. She saw their sleeping faces so peaceful yet so fragile. The choice was clear, though it broke her heart. There was no other way. With a final, sorrowful look at Eric and Frey, she nodded her acceptance. She bid a silent farewell to her loved ones, sending her love out into the world one last time. prayer whispered from her soul. As she surrendered herself to the goddess, a blinding white light erupted from the temple, so bright it turned the night into day. The energy shot across the sky, a silver arrow streaking back toward the fjord. In that exact instant, every villager gasped, their eyes flying open as if waking from a long, confusing dream. They were disoriented and weak, but they were alive. Eric and Frey eventually made their way back to the village, where they were welcomed as heroes who had broken the curse. They told the story of their journey, but a profound sadness hung over their victory, for Yrsa was not with them. The village slowly returned to its former rhythm, but it was forever changed. They owed their lives to the young healer who had vanished into the mountains. Now, whenever the full moon hangs high and bright in the night sky, the villagers gather outside. They look up, and sometimes, if they watch closely, they can see a faint silver figure dancing among the clouds, a celestial guardian watching over them. They sing songs of Yrsa, the moon-scarred healer, the girl who saved them by embracing the heavens. Her story became a legend, passed down through generations. Yrsa was no longer just a memory. She had become a protector spirit. Her presence is felt on the wind, a guiding light for lost travelers and a haunting chill for those with malice in their hearts. From her place in the night sky, she is forever watching over the people she loved, her sacrifice a constant, shimmering reminder of her heroic surrender. In the wake of a powerful king's death, Norway splintered. The great kingdom shattered into a mosaic of rival clans, each vying for dominance in the ensuing power vacuum. Old alliances, once forged in blood and steel, crumbled into dust. Raiders, emboldened by the chaos, descended upon villages that were once considered allies, their longships cutting through the fjords like sharks through water. It was a time of treachery and strife, where the only law was the edge of an axe. Amidst this turmoil, a young chieftain named Sigurd inherited the leadership of his clan. His succession was not one of celebration but of sorrow, for his father had been slain in a cowardly ambush, a victim of the very chaos that now threatened to consume them all. The weight of a fractured kingdom and the future of his people now rested on his young shoulders. He was no longer just a son, and the Sigurd Wolf battle and his saga was about to begin. With his father's blood still staining the earth, Sigurd swore an oath of vengeance. He called a council, summoning the jarls of neighboring clans to his longhouse, hoping to forge a new alliance from the ashes of the old. He stood before them, a youth hardened by grief, and spoke of unity and retribution. But his words fell on deaf ears. Many of the grizzled jarls, veterans of countless battles, saw only a boy playing at being a leader. They dismissed his pleas, claiming his clan was too weak, his experience too little to command their respect or their warriors. As the council dissolved, hope dwindled. Yet not all abandoned him. Two figures remained by his side. Brynhild, an elite shield maiden whose skill with a shield and axe was legendary, had been his friend since childhood. Her loyalty was unwavering. The other was Torvald, a mysterious strategist from distant lands, whose sharp mind and quiet demeanor concealed a profound understanding of warfare. With only these two allies, Sigurd's path to vengeance seemed impossibly steep. To forge a war host worthy of his cause, Sigurd embarked on a perilous journey across the jagged fjords and windswept mountains of Norway. He and his small retinue sought out the dispossessed and the forgotten, those who had no love for the squabbling jarls. They traveled to the shadowy forests to recruit outlaw berserkers, men whose battle fury was as untamed as the beasts they lived among. They climbed into the high peaks to find expert bowmen, hunters whose arrows flew with lethal precision. They sailed to the coastal settlements, convincing the finest shipbuilders to lend their craft to his growing fleet. As warriors from every corner of the fractured land flocked to his side, a new symbol was needed to bind them together. A banner was crafted, bearing the snarling head of a wolf. It became their emblem, the Wolf Banner, a testament to their shared fury and their unified purpose. Their numbers grew, and a sense of strength began to take root in Sigurd's war camp. To celebrate their burgeoning power and foster camaraderie, a great feast was held in the longhouse. Mead flowed freely, and the sounds of laughter and boasting filled the hall. But the celebration was cut short by screams of agony. Several of Sigurd's most trusted men collapsed, their faces contorted in pain. Victims of a fast-acting poison slipped into their horns of mead. A chilling silence fell over the feast as the grim reality set in. The enemy was not just outside their walls, but within their very ranks. An investigation pointed to treachery from someone in Sigurd's inner circle, someone who had access to his closest advisors. A seed of paranoia was planted in Sigurd's mind. He looked at the faces around him, at Brynhild, at Torvald, at men he had known his whole life, and for the first time, he began to doubt even those he trusted most. The first major test of their strength came under the cold light of a winter moon. An enemy army, seeking to crush Sigurd's rebellion before it could gain more momentum, launched a surprise attack. Their warriors charged across a vast frozen river, their battle cries echoing in the frigid air. They expected to overwhelm Sigurd's smaller force with sheer numbers. But Sigurd and Torvald had anticipated such a move. Instead of meeting the charge head-on, Sigurd's forces executed a clever, devastating tactic. As the enemy host reached the center of the river, hidden warriors shattered the ice with heavy hammers and axes. The frozen surface cracked and splintered, plunging hundreds of enemy soldiers into the lethally cold water below. The charge dissolved into chaos and panic. It was a decisive victory, won not by brute force, but by cunning. Yet, in the confusion of the aftermath, Torvald was ambushed and dragged away by unknown assailants, disappearing into the winter gloom. The capture of his chief strategist sent a shockwave through Sigurd's camp. It was then that Brynhild approached him, her face grim, bearing a devastating secret. She revealed that Torvald was not who he seemed. He was, she claimed, the bastard son of the very enemy Jarl they fought against. His entire presence in their camp had been a lie, a long-conceived plot to destroy Sigurd's clan from within. His capture, she insisted, was a ruse to escape before his treachery was uncovered. Doubt, already festering in Sigurd's heart since the poisoning, threatened to consume him. The evidence seemed to align, and many of his captains called for Torvald to be declared a traitor. Yet Sigurd hesitated. He looked at Brynhild, his oldest friend, and saw the conviction in her eyes. But he could not bring himself to condemn a man based on rumor alone. He made a difficult choice. Loyalty and justice had to stand above fear. With his war host now a formidable army, Sigurd marched on the final fortress of the enemy Jarl. The time for diplomacy and doubt was over. The final confrontation was at hand. As his army prepared for a massive siege, Brynhild, still determined to prove Torvald's guilt, volunteered for a dangerous mission. Using her skill and knowledge of the enemy's lands, she would infiltrate the stronghold to find definitive proof of Torvald's betrayal. She slipped through the enemy's defenses under the cover of darkness. What she discovered inside the stone walls, however, was not what she expected. Overhearing a clandestine meeting, she learned the horrifying truth. The true traitor was not Torvald, but Sigurd's own uncle, the very man who had positioned himself as a loyal advisor after Sigurd's father's death. It was he who had orchestrated the ambush that killed the old king, hoping to seize power for himself. As dawn broke, Sigurd's army stormed the fortress gates. The siege was brutal and swift, the fury of the Wolf Banner's host overwhelming the fortress's defenders. Sigurd fought his way through the chaos, his mind set on a single purpose. He found his uncle in the great hall, standing before the Jarl's high seat. There, amidst the clash of steel and the cries of the dying, uncle and nephew confronted each other. It was a duel, not just of axes, but of words. The uncle spat accusations of foolish ambition, while Sigurd championed the cause of loyalty and honor. Their final battle was a whirlwind of rage and grief, ending only when Sigurd, avenging his father and his clan, struck his uncle down. With the fall of the false lord, Sigurd reclaimed his family's honor. The remaining clans, witnessing his strength and integrity, bent the knee, uniting at last beneath the wolf banner. A great thing, an assembly of all the Jarls of the North, was held on the fields where the final battle was won. Recognizing his leadership and the justice of his cause, the chieftains unanimously declared Sigurd the new High King of a united Norway. Standing before his people, Sigurd dispensed his first royal judgments. Torvald, who had been rescued during the siege, and whose loyalty was now proven beyond all doubt, was cleared of all suspicion and named Sigurd's war chief, his tactical genius finally given its due respect. An age of peace and unity seemed to dawn for the North. The saga of Sigurd Wolf Banner had reached its triumphant climax. But as the kingdom celebrated its newfound stability, lookouts on the coast spotted unfamiliar sails on the horizon. A new power was approaching from across the sea, promising that the struggles of the North were far from over. In a remote fjord where the sea meets the sky, a village teetered on the brink of ruin. The crops failed, turning black in the soil, and the once bountiful waters grew eerily still, the fish having vanished without a trace. A chill, deeper than any winter, settled over the hearts of the people. Whispers turned to desperate prayers as they feared the gods had abandoned them, their sacrifices and songs no longer reaching the halls of Asgard. Among the despairing faces was a young explorer, Leif Ironstep. While others looked to the heavens for answers, Leif's gaze was fixed on the horizon. He dreamed not of divine intervention, but of charting the unknown, of discovering new lands and resources that could breathe life back into his dying home. One evening, as the villagers huddled around their dwindling fires, a figure emerged from the mist, a wandering skald, his face a roadmap of ancient tales, his eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 journeys. He carried with him a tattered, salt-stained map, a fragment of a forgotten age. Unfurling it with trembling hands, he spoke of a myth whispered only in the farthest corners of the North, the Crystal Mountain. He claimed it was a place of impossible power, a peak that held a divine source of warmth and light, a direct blessing from Freya herself. But his words came with a chilling prophecy. "Those who seek the mountain's gift," he croaked, his voice like grinding stones, "must be prepared to leave a part of their soul behind on its icy slopes." The skald's tale ignited a spark in Leif's heart. Hope, dangerous and bright, took root. He knew this was their only chance. He began to gather a crew, not of the strongest or most seasoned warriors, but of those with something to prove. First was Ingrid, a shield maiden whose courage was as sharp as her axe, her spirit untamed by the village's despair. Then came Soren, a young carpenter whose hands could shape wood into wonders, yet whose talent was overshadowed by the doubts of others. Finally, there was Arnulf, a stoic berserker, a mountain of a man haunted by a past he sought to redeem. He joined the quest not for glory, but for a chance to find peace. As they prepared their longship, the village elder bestowed a blessing upon them, but his eyes held a deep-seated fear. He warned them of the journey ahead, of the ancient things that slumbered above the clouds, and the price the mountain always demands. With the elder's words echoing in their ears, they pushed off from the shore, their longship cutting through the icy gray waters. Their voyage took them toward the edge of the world, into a realm of myth and legend. Giant icebergs, like floating fortresses of a forgotten kingdom, drifted past them. They navigated storms that seemed to rage with a malevolent intelligence, the waves crashing against their hull like the fists of angry gods. The nights were even more unsettling. The aurora borealis, the northern lights, danced across the sky, but not with their usual ethereal grace. Instead, they flickered unnaturally, twisting into shapes like flaming serpents their colors venomous and strange. And from the black depths of the sea, a haunting music would rise, a siren's call that was both beautiful and terrifying, promising everything and nothing, tempting them to abandon their quest and surrender to the deep. After weeks at sea, they finally made landfall on a frozen shore, a desolate landscape of black rock and eternal snow. The first sign that they had entered a different world were the footprints. They were enormous, pressed deep into the frozen earth, each one the size of a small boat. As they ventured inland, they discovered the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Giant-sized armor, rusted and broken, lay half-buried in the snow, alongside colossal weapons that no mortal could ever hope to wield. It was here that Ingrid's knowledge of the old ways proved vital. She found ancient runes carved into a towering stone monolith. As she traced the symbols, her voice hushed with awe and fear. She deciphered the story of a cataclysmic war fought eons ago, a war between the gods and the giants, with the Crystal Mountain itself as the prize. They were treading on the graveyard of titans. Leaving the land of the giants behind, they began their ascent. The Crystal Mountain loomed before them, its peak shrouded in swirling, unnatural clouds. A strange phenomenon occurred. The higher they climbed, the warmer the air grew. Steam hissed from deep cracks in the ice, and the frozen ground beneath their feet began to thaw. But the mountain's warmth was not a welcoming embrace. It was a fever dream. The air itself seemed to shimmer with illusions. Whispers on the wind took the form of loved ones calling their names, begging them to turn back. Paths that were clear one moment would vanish the next, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend and twist around them. The mountain was testing them, preying on their deepest fears and desires. For Arnulf, the silent berserker, the psychological toll was too great. He stopped, his eyes wide with the vision only he could see, a phantom from his past, offering the redemption he so desperately craved. He cried out, and without a word to his companions, vanished into the thick swirling clouds. Heartbroken but resolute, Leif, Ingrid, and Soren pressed on, climbing above the clouds into a world of impossible light. At the summit, they found not a peak of rock and ice, but a vast, glowing chamber. Gigantic crystal pillars pulsed with an inner luminescence, casting rainbows that danced on the walls of a cavern that felt like the heart of a living star. In the center of the chamber, an entity began to form from the swirling light and energy. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, but a guardian, a living embodiment of the mountain's ancient power. Its voice was not sound, but a thought that echoed directly in their minds, ancient and powerful. It acknowledged their struggle and their courage, but confirmed the Skald's warning. To grant its power to mortals, to share the eternal flame that warmed the mountain, it demanded a sacrifice, a soul for a soul. The Guardian's demand hung in the crystalline air. It offered them the choice. One of them must be sacrificed to save the many. Ingrid gripped her axe, ready to offer her own life. Soren, pale but determined, stepped forward, willing to give up his future. But Leif, as their leader, held up his hand, refusing. He would not sacrifice his friends. He would not trade one life for another, no matter the cost. He looked at the radiant guardian and made a counteroffer. He would not give his life, but something far more precious. He offered his memories. He would surrender his past, every recollection of his family, his home, the faces of his friends, the very reason he had embarked on this perilous journey. He would give up his soul not in death, but in life. A silence fell upon the chamber. The guardian, perhaps moved by this unprecedented choice, agreed. The light flared, and as a single shard of eternal flame was released into Leif's hands, his past was wiped away, leaving only an empty vessel with a hero's resolve. They returned to their village not as a triumphant crew, but as a somber trio. The shard of eternal flame was placed in the heart of the settlement, and its divine warmth spread across the land. The crops grew green and strong, the sea teemed with fish once more, and life returned to the fjord. Leif was hailed as a savior, a hero of legend. They held feasts in his honor, sang songs of his bravery, but he stood among them as a stranger. He saw the joy in their faces, but felt no connection. He heard his name, but did not recognize it as his own. He saved his people, but at the cost of his own identity. Ingrid and Soren stood by his side, the keepers of his story, forever reminding him of the man he once was. His name became a legend whispered for generations. Leif Ironstep, the warrior who saved his people by surrendering everything he was. His sacrifice became the eternal flame that not only warmed their land, but also burned brightly in their collective memory. In the heart of the Viking Age, a time etched in frost and fire, our story begins under a sky bleeding crimson. A comet, the color of a fresh wound, tore through the tapestry of the night, a harbinger of chaos and change. The people of the Northlands, hardy folk accustomed to the whims of cruel gods and colder winters, looked up in a mixture of awe and terror. They knew it was an omen, a sign from the Aesir themselves. In a smoke-filled longhouse, where shadows danced like spirits, an ancient Valva, a seeress whose eyes held the wisdom of ages, fell into a trance. Her voice, a rasping whisper that carried the weight of prophecy, spoke of a new age. An age of iron and blood, a betrayal sharp as a serpent's tooth, and of discoveries that would reshape the very world. She spoke of a warrior, a child born under the raven's shadow, destined to rise from obscurity and carve a saga into the annals of history. The gods, she claimed, whispered his name on the winds, a name that would one day echo from the fjords of Scandinavia to the shores of unknown lands. This is the world of the Norsemen, a fractured land of warring jarldoms scattered across the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia. Here, life is a constant struggle. The winters are long and unforgiving, turning the land to ice and pushing communities to the brink of starvation. Resources are scarce, and what little there is fiercely contested. Alliances are forged in mead halls and sealed with oaths, but they are as brittle as winter ice. Rivalries fester for generations, passed down from father to son, often erupting into brutal conflicts where the only law is the edge of an axe. In this world, honor is a man's most valuable possession, worth more than gold or land. A slight against one's family can ignite a blood feud that consumes entire clans. And weaving through it all is the concept of word fate. The Norse believe their destinies are spun by the Norns, cosmic beings who decree the length and path of every life. A man can fight, he can rage against his fate, but he cannot escape it. And above all, the gods watch: Odin, Thor, Freya. Their influence is felt in every storm, every battle, every birth. They are not distant deities. They are active participants, their whims and interventions shaping the lives of mortals. This is the saga of Eirik, the Ravenborn. Our story finds its heart in a small, windswept village nestled between a dense, dark forest and a steel-gray fjord. This is the home of Eirik. He is not a jarl's son, nor a famed warrior. He is an orphan, found as a babe adrift in a broken boat, and raised by a modest farming family who loved him as their own. He knows the toil of the land, the bite of the winter wind, and the simple joys of a harvest brought safely home. Yet there is a fire in Eirik that sets him apart. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, hold a depth that belies his youth. He is faster, stronger, and quicker to learn the ways of the axe and shield than any other boy in the village. Ravens, Odin's own messengers, seem to follow him, their dark forms circling overhead wherever he goes. A strange birthmark, shaped like a raven's claw, rests upon his shoulder, a constant, silent reminder of his unknown origins. Though he loves his adoptive family dearly, a question haunts his quiet moments. Who is he? Does noble blood run through his veins? Or is his lineage something far darker, something tied to the shadows that linger at the edge of the world? Eirik's quiet life is built on a fragile peace, a peace he doesn't know is about to be shattered. The turning point, the inciting incident that will set his destiny in motion, arrives with the dawn. Smoke, thick and acrid, chokes the morning air. The terrifying sound of war horns echoes from the fjord, a sound that freezes the blood. Out of the morning mist, long ships slice through the water, their dragon prows snarling. They bear the sigil of Jarl Ragnar the Cruel, a notoriously ambitious and ruthless chieftain from a rival jarldom to the north. Ragnar's raiders swarm the beach like a plague of locusts, their axes and swords glinting in the rising sun. They are not here for tribute. They are here for annihilation. The village's few able-bodied men, farmers and fishermen, grab their hunting spears and wood axes, forming a desperate shield wall to protect their homes and families. It is a brave but futile stand. Eirik, no longer a boy, but not yet a man, fights with a fury that surprises even himself. He moves with an instinct he didn't know he possessed, his training axe becoming a deadly extension of his arm. He sees his adoptive father, a kind, gentle man who taught him how to sow seeds and mend nets, stand bravely against a towering berserker. He shouts a warning, but it's too late. With a sickening crunch, the berserker's axe cleaves through the old farmer's shield and bites deep. A primal scream tears from Eirik's throat. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and grief. The world narrows to a single point, the man standing over his father's body. Something ancient and wild awakens within him. The strength of a bear, the speed of a wolf. He charges, his movements a blur of controlled chaos. He dodges a wild swing and buries his own axe in the berserker's side. The giant falls, shock and disbelief in his dying eyes. But one victory cannot turn the tide of a massacre. All around him, Eirik sees his world burning. His home, his life, his family, all turn to ash and blood. He watches in horror as the raiders drag his adoptive mother and younger sister away, their screams lost in the din of battle. He is helpless, wounded, and utterly broken. The raiders plunder what little the village has, set fire to the longhouses, and depart as quickly as they came, leaving behind a scene of utter desolation. As the smoke clears, Eirik is left alone amidst the dead and the dying. The man who raised him is gone. The mother who loved him and the sister he protected are captured, their fate worse than death. The village that was his entire world is a smoldering ruin. In that moment of absolute loss, grief turns to cold, hard resolve. The farm boy is gone, burned away in the flames of the raid. In his place stands a survivor, a young man with nothing left to lose and a heart filled with a burning need for vengeance. He kneels by his father's side, closes the man's lifeless eyes, and makes a solemn vow upon the hilt of a fallen warrior's sword. He will find Jarl Ragnar. He will rescue his family, and he will have his revenge. He will become the warrior the Volva prophesied. This is not just a promise. It is his new fate, his word. The path is set. The saga of Eirik Ravenborn has truly begun. His journey will take him from the ashes of his home into the heart of the brutal political world of the Vikings, where he must become a leader, a legend, and perhaps the very storm the gods have been waiting for. In the heart of a once thriving fjord, a shadow has fallen. Where laughter once echoed across the water, now only a chilling silence remains. The people of our village live in fear, their days marked by unexplained disappearances. One day, it's a lone fisherman, his boat found adrift. The next, a shepherd vanishes from the high pastures. Our livestock are found lifeless, not a mark on them, yet drained of all blood. The elders whisper tales of pale, ghastly figures lurking just beneath the water's surface, their eyes like cold, dead stars. But while they whisper, I, Arvid, will act. I swear on the spirits of my ancestors that I will uncover the source of this darkness and banish it from our homes. The time for fear is over. The time for answers has come. Our village seer, a woman whose eyes see beyond the veil of this world, points a trembling finger towards the misty island that looms in the fjord. Upon it sits a great barrow, a burial mound from the age of our grandest conquests, a time when Viking longships ruled the waves. For generations, it has lain untouched, a monument to the dead. But the seer claims the dead no longer rest. She says the barrow is now a throne room for a Draugr king, a restless warlord from a forgotten era, awakened by a greed so powerful it defied death itself. And we believe her, for every night, when the moon is high and the world is still, we hear it an eerie, rhythmic drumming that echoes across the water. A heartbeat from the grave, calling its soldiers to rise. The island is cursed, and its curse is spreading. To face a king of the dead, one cannot go alone. I knew I needed a fellowship bound by more than just blood. First, I sought out my own brother, Canute. He's strong and a capable warrior, but his heart is filled with skepticism. He scoffed at tales of the walking dead, yet he agreed to come, more for the glory he imagines than the danger he believes. Next, I found Runa, the finest huntress in the fjord. Her eyes miss nothing, her steps are silent as the falling snow, and her aim is as true as the North Star. She understands the ancient ways and knows the balance we must restore. Finally, I journeyed to the outcast's hovel at the edge of the woods to find a Kekel, an old sorcerer exiled for dabbling in forbidden's magic. His knowledge of runes and the weaknesses of the undead is our only true advantage. Together, we are a strange alliance, a believer, a skeptic, a hunter, and a mage. We began our preparations, etching sacred runes of protection onto our shields, anointing our blades with blessed oils, and most importantly, forging arrowheads and spear tips with silver, the one metal the Draugr are said to fear. The journey to the island was a descent into a waking nightmare. A thick, unnatural fog, cold and clammy, rose from the fjord, choking the air and clinging to our longship like a shroud. It was more than just mist. It was a living presence. Whispers slithered through it, clawing at the edges of our minds, speaking of our deepest fears and greatest doubts. Canute gripped his axe, his skepticism wavering. Ekel chanted softly, his voice a fragile shield against the encroaching dread. When our boat finally scraped against the island's shore, the air grew even colder. Ancient runnestones, half buried in the soil, pulsed with a faint, sickly blue fire, marking a path toward the barrow. It was Runa who made the first terrifying discovery. She knelt, pointing to the damp earth. Footprints, not human, but dragging, heavy tracks. They didn't lead towards the barrow, as grave robbers would. They led out of it. The dead were already walking. We advanced with weapons drawn, the silence of the island broken only by the crunch of our boots on cursed soil. Then the ground began to tremble. From the unmarked graves surrounding the great barrow, skeletal hands clawed their way out, followed by desiccated bodies clad in rusted mail. The Draugr warriors rose, their eye sockets glowing with the same malevolent blue light as the runnestones. The battle was instant and chaotic. Their strength was unholy, their movements unnaturally fast. We fought back to back, a desperate whirlwind of silver and steel against rotting flesh and bone. Finally, breaking through the undead legion, we stormed the entrance of the barrow. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of death and ancient treasures. And there, upon a throne of skulls and tarnished gold, sat the Draugr king. He was immense, a former warlord whose malice had preserved him in undeath. He turned his burning gaze upon me, not with aggression, but with a chilling proposition. He offered me a place at his side, to rule with him as an eternal conqueror, to share in the spoils of a world brought to its knees. The Draugr king's voice was a venomous whisper, promising endless power and riches beyond imagination. The hoard of gold and jewels piled around his throne glinted in the torchlight, and I saw a dangerous hunger ignite in my brother's eyes. As I prepared to refuse the cursed offer, Canute suddenly turned, his axe swinging not at the undead, but at me. He screamed that he was tired of our small life, of struggling for scraps. He would take the king's offer, even if it meant an eternity of damnation. His betrayal shattered our shield wall. The Draugr swarmed us, and for a moment, all seemed lost. Runa was overwhelmed, and I was parrying my own brother's furious attacks. It was then that Ekel, the old sorcerer, made the ultimate sacrifice. With a final defiant cry, he smashed his vials of blessed oil at the foot of the throne. The cursed treasure, a catalyst for the king's power, erupted in a blaze of holy fire, incinerating scores of the undead in a cleansing inferno. Ekel's sacrifice bought us precious seconds. The flames raged, momentarily holding back the Draugr horde. I looked at Canute, his face twisted by greed, his eyes no longer those of my brother, but of a monster. He was the anchor of the curse now, his mortal greed feeding the king's power. There was no reasoning with him, no saving him. With a heart heavier than any stone, I understood what I had to do. I was not just fighting for my village anymore. I was fighting for my brother's soul. I dodged his wild swing, my own blade finding its mark. As Canute fell, the last of his humanity returned to his eyes in a fleeting moment of regret. His death broke the pact. The Draugr king let out a final agonizing howl, not of pain, but of rage. His connection to the mortal world severed. He and his vast treasure crumbled into a mountain of dust and ash, his promises of an inevitable return echoing in the sudden silence of the tomb. We returned not as conquerors, but as solemn survivors. Runa and I gathered the bones of Ekel and Canute, determined to give them the proper rights they deserved, to ensure their spirits would find peace, not the restless damnation that had consumed this island. The fog over the fjord lifted with the rising sun, and the waters seemed to clear for the first time in months. Our village was safe. The disappearances stopped, and the sounds of life slowly began to return. But I am forever changed. I brought peace to my people, but I carry a war within my own soul. The shadows I fought now live inside me, a constant reminder of the brother I lost and the sacrifice that was made. Our victory is now etched into the great runestone in the village center, a story of vigilance, of courage, and a somber lesson on the true cost of honor. It will stand forever as a warning and a testament.